The first thing Olivia thought was that in the past she had wanted to be transported into the world of her novel. She had always wished for that, but now she found herself in an unexpected situation. Before she can even understand what is happening around her, the bomb drops right into her lap, without warning and without any chance to defend herself. In front of her, 3 men and a boy watch her, and then the blonde prince with light-colored eyes points a finger at her and pronounces the sentence. From that moment on, Olivia Thyme is exiled from noble society. What a wonderful way to start her new life, isn't it? Going back a little into the past, we see Olivia in real life, a woman with long dark hair and lilac eyes. She has just returned home and exhausted, throws herself face down onto her bed, her shoes abandoned on the floor and her hair spread across the pillow, while thinking about how she almost missed the last train of the day. The exhaustion does the rest. She remembers that she joined a publishing company precisely because she was passionately in love with light novels. But in a twist of fate, she ended up in the company's business division, and she has been following that routine for almost 10 years now. Deep down, she likes her job, but the heavy workload leaves her feeling a little depressed whenever she stops to think about her own future. Girl, I totally get you. My biggest fear was adulthood, and honestly, I was right to be afraid of it. And as if work-related worries were not enough, she thinks about how everyone around her is moving on with their lives, getting married, some already having children, while she has remained single for so long that she would rather not even bother counting. Still lying down, she lets her gaze fall to the floor beside the bed and notices the box she had brought back from her parents' house. Curiosity gets the better of her, so she opens it, and what she finds is a true treasure chest of memories, packed with manga and light novels that she devoured during her student days. As she flips through the materials, she recognizes a book she used as a reference when writing a novel about her favorite ship. A powerful wave of nostalgia hits her all at once. She remembers how carefree that time was, with no sales targets, no fear of the future, when the only important mission of the day was to fully embrace the life of an otaku. Among the memories, she comes across an old pink flip phone, still decorated with a little teddy bear keychain attached to it. She picks up the device and thinks that it is so old that the battery has probably been dead for ages. I just got flashbacks from seeing this phone. Ah, I miss school so much. However, she gets a surprise when she opens the phone and presses the power button. It is still working perfectly, with the screen lit up and the keys glowing. Once it turns on, she realizes that this is not just any phone she used to have when she was younger. This was the phone she used to write and publish her novel. On top of that, she gets another surprise. The device still contains the original copy of the story she created herself. A flood of memories returns when she sees her old novel and thinks about how she used to publish her story everywhere while dreaming of becoming a novelist. But now, rereading it through the eyes of an adult, she almost dies of embarrassment. The writing is rough, the world building poorly developed, and the entire work, she admits, is simply terrible. The conclusion she reaches is harsh but honest. The whole novel looks like a collection of the most random fantasies of an otaku girl, all thrown together into one place. Even so, she cannot help but recognize how dedicated she was to that dream back then. And a sincere smile escapes her lips when she remembers the silent wish hidden behind every page, that one day a handsome man would finally come and save that lonely soul. I absolutely love seeing people who are passionate about stories. Our protagonist is honestly such a queen. Enchanted by this reunion with her past, she continues turning page after page until she finally reaches the end of the story. And right after the last page, a strange option appears on the screen. Continue writing. Even without understanding where it came from, she ends up pressing the button almost automatically, without thinking much about the consequences. At that very instant, the phone begins to glow with an unnatural intensity, releasing a light that slips through her fingers, and she can barely process how all of this is happening, simply because she touched the words "continue writing." A bright bluish light fills the entire room and completely envelops her, while the phone seems to react on its own, without her needing to do anything else. When the light finally fades, she is no longer in her room. Only the phone remains behind, abandoned on the floor beside the open box, while her body is dragged to a completely different place. Collapsed on a red carpet, sore and frightened, she lets out a low groan and realizes that she is wearing an elegant dress with dark ruffles. Everything about the situation is confusing her. She begins looking around and notices that she is inside a huge, luxurious hall, surrounded by nobles dressed in formal attire. Confused and frightened, she asks what is happening and where she is. That is when a young man with blonde hair and blue eyes scolds her, asking why she is acting this way now of all times, and calls her by a name, Olivia. After hearing the young man's words, she finally understands that in this world she is called Olivia, but something still lingers in the back of her mind. Deep down, she feels as though she has seen that name somewhere before, and then it hits her. Olivia is the name of the villainess from the book she was reading, the story she herself wrote. I think it would be terrifying to reincarnate into a story I wrote, especially as the villainess. As she tries to absorb everything, another young man with silver hair continues provoking her. He calls the first young man Lord Schiller and says that he should stop making such a frightening face, or Olivia might end up getting scared. Lord Schiller, the young man with dark hair and a uniform adorned with golden epaulets, replies with disdain that Olivie is not some ordinary girl, so she would not be frightened simply because of the way he is speaking. Upon hearing that name, she experiences another important revelation. If she is not mistaken, Schiller is the name of the main hero of the story. In other words, she is surrounded by the central characters of her own novel. And worst of all, she is standing on the opposite side of the protagonists. Shortly afterward, the blonde prince approaches with a serious expression and asks whether she already knows what is about to happen. Still lost and beginning to feel afraid, she can only stammer, I. Then the sentence is delivered, exactly as in the opening scene. I. The prince calls her by her full name, Olivie Time, and, with his gloved finger pointed directly at her, declares that from this moment onward she is exiled from noble society. Realizing what is happening, recognizing a familiar name and a plot filled with the kind of clichés only a teenager would write, she comes to only one conclusion: she is the villainess in this story. And as she finally begins to understand everything she is going through, a thought emerges in her mind. Did I really transmigrate into my own light novel? But she arrived in this world in the worst possible way. With a situation like this, calling her unlucky would be an understatement. Olivie is completely stunned, her hands half raised and her gaze unfocused as she tries to process the scale of the disaster she has found herself in. Amid the shock, reality finally sinks in. She really has reincarnated inside the romance novel she wrote during her teenage years. Trying to calm herself down, she begins to think things through like the practical adult she is. If this truly is the world of her novel, then all those handsome young men standing before her, lined up among the hall's columns, can only be the four most important members of the Noble Council, the organization whose word is final within the Academy. The first to speak is the president of the Noble Council, Schiller Schefflera, the young man with blonde hair and light blue eyes, dressed entirely in white and gold. With a serious expression, he does absolutely nothing to ease Olivie's terror. He tells her that she has undoubtedly understood the situation already, and that being expelled from the Noble Council automatically means being expelled from the Academy as well. Next speaks the council's treasurer, Noir Blanca, a young man with silver hair, yellow eyes, a blue gemstone earring, and a uniform decorated with golden epaulets. With his eyes lowered, speaking in a more regretful tone and wearing an expression of disappointment, he says that unfortunately there is no longer any place for her there. He addresses her as Miss Olivie, as though they were complete strangers. Then comes the council's secretary, Orit Trenia, a young man with dark hair, glasses, and blue eyes, speaking politely, in complete contrast to the previous two, and adjusting his glasses with a gloved hand, he offers to help her pack her belongings if she needs assistance. Finally, we are introduced to the last member of the quartet, the vice president of the council, Aster Sonquel, a young man with messy reddish-brown hair and red eyes. With a teasing tone and a half-smile on his face, he jabs at his colleagues and asks whether they are not being a little too kind to her. Finally, we learn Olivie's role, or rather, her former role. She was the council's scribe. I have to admit, I'm curious about what she did, because for everyone to turn against her this openly, it must have been something pretty serious. Observing all of them, the protagonist pieces everything together and confirms her worst suspicion. She really has transmigrated into the body of Olivie, the great villainess of the story she wrote as a teenager. While she is still processing all of that, a new figure joins the conversation between her and the four young men. And that figure is none other than the heroine of the novel, Lenaria Forklock, a young woman with wavy brown hair and golden eyes wearing a large pink ribbon on her uniform. She approaches them with a worried expression and asks everyone to show mercy to Miss Olivie, suggesting that they stop what they are doing. Seeing the scene, Olivie connects the dots. She was part of the Noble Council and is being expelled for bullying Lenaria. So the original Olivie was a thorn in everyone's side? Well, who would have thought? A villainess acting like a villainess. What a scandal. The heroine's intervention only makes it even more obvious how adored Lenaria is by everyone present. Schiller comments on how kind and gentle she is, especially considering that she is willing to defend someone as cruel as Olivie. And Lenaria herself reinforces her saintly image by putting herself down. She says that she is nothing compared to Lord Schiller and that, despite having no talent whatsoever, she still insists on helping others, all while her eyes glisten with unshed tears. Her words, accompanied by her restrained crying, catch Schiller off guard, and he ends up stammering her name. Internally, Olivie watches the interaction and already knows this storyline by heart. A heroine with no real abilities, constantly victimized by bullying, appears in the story. And for some reason, the president of the Noble Council seems to have more than enough reasons to adore her. Rereading her own plot through the eyes of an adult, she admits without mercy that the story she wrote is simply far too cheesy. Yeah, when we're younger, it's tough to create something truly good. Everyone has gone through that embarrassing wall of text phase. And as every good cliché demands, the president is not the only one to react to the heroine's words. Aster Sonquel, the vice president, complete with a musical note practically floating out of his speech bubble because of how sarcastic he is, tells Schiller and Lenaria that the two of them are putting on quite a performance with this little scene. Schiller is startled by the jab. Noir Blanca, the treasurer, joins in as well, and staring directly at the president, says that it would hardly be fair for him to be the only one allowed to get so close to the defenseless young lady. Schiller's shock only grows and he finds himself unable to say anything else. Oret Trenia, the secretary, remains silent, merely observing everyone through his glasses with a thoughtful expression. Olavi watches all of this and remembers, in her story all 4 members of the council are obsessed with Lunaria. I absolutely love that she planted all these cliches with her own hands and is now sitting here judging every single one of them. It's the most entertaining kind of hypocrisy to watch. As she watches the president stumble over his own explanations to his colleagues, a single thought takes over her mind. And that thought points directly to the problem. She knows exactly how this story ends. If nothing changes, Olavi will be banished to a remote and isolated region and will eventually die completely alone, abandoned in a forgotten corner of the world. And she concludes that being killed by the terrible plot she herself wrote would be far too tragic. That is when she decides to go against the story unfolding before her. She stands up, revealing her full uniform, a navy blue jacket over a purple skirt, a pink ribbon tied around her neck, and heeled boots, and approaches the group in the middle of their heated discussion, determined to get Lunaria's attention. As soon as Schiller notices Olavi approaching, he takes the opportunity to change the direction of the conversation. He turns toward her and immediately becomes aggressive. Pointing a finger directly at her face, he shouts, asking whether she has nothing to say about the entire situation. But Olavi remains unfazed. With the greatest calm in the world, she steps forward and looks Schiller directly in the eyes without backing down even a single step, standing face to face with him. Then she says that yes, she does have something to say, and throws the question back at him. What is the real reason they want to expel her from the council? Or outraged, Schiller replies that she knows perfectly well. It has already been explained before. She is being expelled because she is guilty of bullying Lunaria. She immediately fires back and demands proof that she actually intimidated Miss Lunaria. Schiller responds that there are numerous testimonies regarding the matter, without giving an inch, and now pointing her finger right back at him. She fires back, then let them show proof that those testimonies are not pure fabrication. Well. The queen clearly binge-watched courtroom dramas to come up with a comeback like that. Welcome to Law & Order Isekai. Schiller is left speechless by such a well-reasoned challenge and finds himself completely unable to respond, visibly shaken. Deep down, Olavi knows she has to bet everything on this move. Even though she acted on impulse, she is gambling that no unexpected twist will appear. After all, her reasoning is sound. Since that novel was created by an otaku teenager deep in her chunibu phase, there is little chance that detailed logic or concrete evidence exists behind those accusations. She highly doubts that her middle school self went through the trouble of inventing actual proof. Taking advantage of Schiller's shock, Olavi does not let up and continues her assault. She says that she already understands that the decision to expel her came solely from him, and then she pulls a loophole from the council's rules. There is a fundamental rule, she explains. Decisions regarding members of the noble council, including expulsions, must be decided through a vote, not through the unilateral whim of a single person. And look at her quoting the regulations from memory. Then again, she wrote this story herself, so she can invent whatever rule she wants and get away with it. She concludes her argument by saying that Schiller should know that very well, and that the final word is not his alone. Therefore, if he is so determined to see her removed, he should call for an official vote. Everyone present turns towards Schiller, waiting for an answer. Noir approaches the president and asks what his decision will be. Oret agrees that the argument is reasonable, and with a hand on his chin, helps tighten the pressure on Schiller even further. Schiller considers the matter for a moment and admits that Olavi's logic is sound. Even so, he makes sure to warn her that, vote or no vote, the final result will not change. Then he makes the decision official, raising 3 fingers. In 3 months, an expulsion election will be held. Olavi will compete against Lunaria, and whoever wins will become an official member of the Noble Council. In the end, she really did manage to sway the council and secure her trial. Internally, Olavi celebrates quietly. That means 3 extra months to stay alive and figure out a way to fix the situation. She then bows to Schiller and thanks him. Afterward, she turns toward Lunaria, extends her hand, and proposes a fair competition. Lunaria is surprised by the gesture but ultimately accepts, and the two seal the agreement with a handshake. Outwardly, Lunaria appears friendly and accepts the entire situation without complaint, wearing a sweet smile with her eyes closed. But inwardly, her thoughts reveal the true face hidden behind the mask. Her expression suddenly darkens, and she grumbles to herself that the entire thing is nothing more than a massive nuisance. Whoa. The saintly heroine is not quite as saintly as she seems, is she? Now things are finally getting interesting. As Olavi and Lunaria shake hands and agree to the election, the 4 council members watch the 2 young women in silence. However, Lunaria suddenly says that all of this was completely unnecessary and slaps Olavi's hand away. Schiller is the first to step forward and approach the heroine. He takes hold of her shoulders and Lunaria immediately nestles herself into his arms. Lunaria's change of masks is instantaneous, and she quickly insists that she is fine. Watching the scene in shock, Olavi looks at the young woman with a certain degree of disdain while wondering how someone could have such an awful personality. She even questions whether she really wrote Lunaria that way. Schiller watches Olavi with a threatening gaze while trying to comfort Lunaria. He then apologizes to Lenaria for the inconvenience and reassures her with a promise. If she wins the election, she will officially be allowed to stay by his side. Sweetly, with her eyes closed, Lenaria gives him her most affectionate expression and says that she understands everything. Look at her switching expressions faster than I switch browser tabs when my boss walks up behind my desk. She should be teaching classes. Watching the scene from a distance, Olivia thinks that at least she managed to escape the fate of immediate expulsion, at least for now, and now her plan is to learn how things work in this world so that she has a chance of winning the election. Seeing that there is nothing left worth watching besides two lovebirds acting enamored with each other, Olivia announces that she is leaving to prepare for the election. Schiller does not miss the opportunity to take another jab at his rival. He tells Olivia that she should start packing her belongings already, because she is definitely going to lose the election. Without losing her composure, Olivia fires back in the same manner, saying that she will do that after seeing the election results. She turns her back on them and bids farewell with complete confidence. This woman takes an insult and returns it with interest and inflation adjustment. Outside the academy, Olivia wanders through the courtyards, lost in her thoughts. Accompanied by the stares of others, she feels as though the pressure of this election is far greater than any presentation she ever had to give in her previous world. But another thought allows Olivia to drift away. Despite all the danger, she is still surrounded by incredibly handsome young men. In a somewhat dreamy mood, she thinks that perhaps it would actually be fun to be the heroine of the story instead of Lenaria. Let's be fair, if I were the one facing exile but the committee responsible for my fate consisted entirely of men at that level, my imagination would wander a little too. It's only human. However, the fantasy quickly fades. For a single office worker in her 30s like herself, perhaps the role of a villainess on the verge of ruin suits her even better than that of a heroine. But she accepts it with a smile, finally snapping out of her daydreams and accepting that she may actually be in the role that fits her life best. Olivia realizes that she has no idea what to do next. Then panic takes over her body. She has absolutely no idea where Olivia lives. She realizes that she has no clue where she is supposed to go, nor how the daily life of the body she has inherited actually works. While Olivia struggles through her address-related crisis, a meeting is taking place inside the council chamber. All 4 council members, together with Lenaria, are discussing how Olivia managed to completely turn the tables in a way none of them expected. Noir, the treasurer, throws out a jab, saying that Schiller could have simply expelled her on the spot. Everyone in the room looks at the treasurer with serious expressions but says nothing. In the end, it is Schiller who breaks the silence. He says that for an organization responsible for maintaining order within the academy, the council cannot simply break its own rules whenever it feels like it. Noir counters by admitting that he is intrigued, because Olivia seems to have become a completely different person from the moment she learned she was going to be expelled. Schiller agrees and says that he never expected the young woman to confront him in that manner. He adds that he hopes this change in attitude does not make Olivia too unpredictable. He finishes by saying that they should not be worried about Olivia herself, but rather about what might happen to Lenaria if Olivia decides to act from the shadows. Lenaria begins to blush when she sees how concerned Schiller is for her. Oret, the secretary, agrees with Schiller and says that he is right to be concerned. His tone becomes threatening as he says that if Olivia tries to do anything to Lenaria, they will have to take measures. The sentence hangs in the air unfinished, but everyone understands exactly what he means. The one who completes the thought is Aster, the vice president. He offers to keep an eye on Olivia for the time being. Schiller asks whether he is truly capable of handling the task. Without hesitation, Aster responds that of course he is. After all, he is Lord Schiller's loyal right-hand man. Translated into plain language, Olivia has just been assigned a personal bodyguard she never asked for. Schiller looks at his second-in-command while thinking that if Aster can truly keep watch over Olivia, it will be the best way to prevent her from doing anything reckless. With the matter discussed and settled, and with Aster watching her, Olivia will not dare attempt anything foolish. That means Lenaria will be able to focus entirely on preparing for the election without any worries. Schiller further explains that, because of his position, he cannot become directly involved. However, at the very least, he can provide all the people and resources she might need. He offers his support, saying that if Lenaria needs anything at all, she only has to ask. Lenaria thanks him and returns to her sweet, carefully crafted smile. Although she appears surprised on the outside, inwardly she feels completely indifferent. Beneath all the politeness, it becomes clear that the entire machinery of the council is already turning in the heroine's favor. Finally, she says that everything is fine and that if she ever needs him, she will let him know without thinking twice, all while giving one of her sincere smiles. Outside the room where the meeting is taking place, leaning discreetly against the door and eavesdropping on everything happening on the other side, a young woman with green hair is carefully noting down every word she hears. With a smile on her face, she thinks to herself that things are becoming more and more interesting as time goes on, and it seems we have our first gossip-loving character in the story. Will she end up helping Olivia at some point? We are in the bedroom of an ordinary young aristocrat, surrounded by packed bookshelves, a study desk, and even more books scattered across every piece of furniture. In the middle of it all, Olivia's sprawled across the bed with her arms open, finally able to relax after a completely insane day. Deep down, she thinks about how lucky she was to find a butler who guided her to her room. Without him, she would probably still be wandering through the academy's endless hallways, and considering her newly established luck, she would most likely have stumbled into an even worse bad ending than the one already waiting for her. Still dwelling on everything she experienced over the past few hours, she wonders whether she is truly going through one of those reincarnation scenarios she has read about in countless novels, or if this is nothing more than an extremely vivid dream. Still lying down, she reaches for one of the books resting on the bed, and picks it up while thinking that everything in this place feels far too real to be just a dream. And it is precisely that realism that opens a crack of panic amid her exhaustion. If this is not a dream, then what happened to her on the other side, in the life she left behind? Olivia furrows her brow as she tries to understand what brought her into this world. The first thing that comes to mind is that she must have been hit by a truck. But no, that definitely did not happen. Then a second possibility appears. Perhaps she simply worked herself to death. That second option could actually be true, considering that over the last few months she had been working like a madwoman at her job. Even so, Olivia cannot bring herself to accept that idea, and the question that refuses to go away remains there. If she really died, what happens to her now? Tired of going around in circles on this carousel of unanswered questions, she ends up clinging to the most convenient explanation. This had to be a dream. After all, it was impossible for someone to be thrown inside a manga. Her attention only shifts when she realizes that the book in her hands is actually a mystery novel. Finally, something she understands in this new world. And I thought it was cute that it happened to be a story similar to the novels from her own world. The sparkle in her eyes changes instantly as she begins reading the book and her interest awakens. After reading the first few pages, she realizes that it has been ages since she last picked up one of her favorite kinds of books. Her work consumed so much of her time that she practically spent the entire year doing nothing but working. Savoring this rare opportunity to do something she truly loves, Olivia dives headfirst into the story and immediately begins commenting on it. A handsome yet somewhat clumsy detective paired with an incredibly competent assistant who carries the entire team? That was practically the dream combination every otaku girl would want to read about. Sitting in the middle of her bed, she finally has a positive thought about this world. If she can avoid that tragic ending, perhaps surviving here for a while would not be so bad after all. With a smile on her face, she ultimately concludes that living in this world would be far too crazy, so imagining a future there is nothing more than a little game she is playing to fool herself. The next day finally dawns over the Great Halcyon Academy. The rays of sunlight stream through the window of Olivia's room, and of course she fell asleep while reading her book. Now she is finally waking up from her beauty sleep. Noticing that she has awakened in the exact same place as the day before, she still finds the entire situation hard to believe. However, she does not have much time to dwell on it when a voice calls to her from outside the room and says that it is time for her to get ready. Surprised, Olivia replies that everything is fine and that she is on her way to open the door. With the help of a maid, she gets dressed and prepares herself for another day in this strange world. Even so, she thinks that she still does not really understand how this world works. For now, though, all she needs to do is be very careful to play the role of Olivia convincingly. She finishes closing her bag, takes a deep breath, and thinks that if she loses the election, there will be no escape from the fate awaiting her. Poor people's happiness really doesn't last long, does it? She had one peaceful night and already woke up drowning in problems. Honestly, that's exactly what my daily life feels like. Finally leaving her dormitory, Olivia travels by carriage to the entrance of the academic building. She steps down, takes a deep breath, and stares at the academy's facade, wondering what path she should take from this point forward. Olivia is pulled from her thoughts by a young man wearing a beret who shouts, "Extra! Extra! Breaking news!" while handing out newspapers to the students at the entrance. She watches several students approach the young man, grabbing newspapers to catch up on the latest news. Amid all the commotion, she picks up one of the newspapers that had fallen to the ground while the newsboy was shouting. Opening it, she reads, "The Great Halcyon Academy Gazette, Special Edition, Election and Dismissal of the Leadership." As she continues reading, Olivia thinks that it looks far more like a gossip tabloid than a serious newspaper. Then it finally clicks. The incident from the previous day involving her and the council has become headline news for that bunch of gossip addicts disguised as journalists. Olivia continues walking through the courtyard with the newspaper in hand until a commotion ahead of her makes her stop. She notices a group of students gathered around Lenaria, who is trying to convince them to vote for her. And of course, the attempt works perfectly. She is immediately embraced and showered with support from everyone around her. Words of encouragement rain down upon her. Some say that only she deserves to stand beside the council president. Others insist that she absolutely has to defeat Olivia, since the latter is viewed as a genuine witch. Lenaria realizes that her plan is working flawlessly and smiles inwardly with satisfaction, all while maintaining her angelic facade and tearfully thanking everyone for their support. I swear, Lineria is so irritating. I absolutely hate fake and manipulative characters like her. Olivia watches the scene and begins reflecting on the social disaster the original Olivia managed to create before she inherited this body. She thinks that it makes perfect sense for Lineria, the protagonist of this cliché-filled story, to be loved and supported by everyone. And when she compares herself to the heroine, she realizes the harsh truth. Olivia is the one who is judged and even hated by practically the entire academy. Trying not to become depressed, Olivia redirects her attention to the newspaper and wonders how they managed to publish the story so quickly after an event that happened only the day before. Peeking at the fine print, she discovers that the newspaper is produced by the Publications Club. Her curiosity immediately grows, since it sounds remarkably similar to the job she had in her previous world. Excited by the possibility of finally finding a place that might help her figure out how to win the election, she fails to notice someone standing directly in front of her. Olivia walks straight into him and nearly falls, but she is caught just in time. The young man firmly wraps an arm around her waist and steadies her. The person who saves her is Aster, who tells her that she should be more careful, and that a noble lady like her should not be reading while walking. With her cheeks turning red, Olivia has no idea how to react to Aster, who only a few hours ago had been treating her with disdain during the council meeting. Staring at the handsome young man, all she manages to say is a stammered, "Sorry." Aster watches her with a smile while looking at the embarrassed Olivia, who is still wondering what exactly he wants from her. Taking the initiative and catching Olivia completely off guard, he reveals that he is there to offer assistance with her election campaign. More confused than ever, Olivia is left speechless, still trying to process everything that has been thrown at her in such a short amount of time. All she can manage is a confused, "Hun?" as she struggles to understand what is happening. Aster looks at the bewildered Olivia and repeats that he is there to help her with her election campaign. And that is when reality truly sinks in for Olivia. One of the protagonists of her story, the very person who was always supposed to be the villainess's enemy, is now offering to fight alongside her. She stares at Aster's confident expression without being able to respond immediately, and all that escapes her lips is another stunned, "Huh?" The idea still refuses to settle in her mind. How is it possible that Aster Songquel is suddenly offering his help so willingly? Unable to process it on her own, she decides to be direct, and asks him what exactly he means by help. The answer comes in the form of a crooked smile and another question. Why, all of a sudden, is she calling him Lord Aster? He steps closer, lowers his voice, and comments that he already had his suspicions, but honestly, she has been acting differently ever since the previous day. And now we have another classic isekai cliché. The protagonist knows absolutely nothing about the past of the person whose body she possesses. I absolutely love this trap every time it appears. Olivia swallows hard, because this is exactly the kind of situation she fears the most. The original Olivia's past opening up a massive abyss right beneath her feet. Two thoughts explode in her mind at the same time. The first is logical and desperate. Has he already figured me out? The second is completely untimely and even louder. His face is way too close, and his face really is far too close. Close enough to genuinely affect Olivia. The blood rushes all the way to her ears, and for a brief moment, panic takes over completely, complete with spirals in her eyes and a face burning red. Pulling herself together, Olivia pretends nothing happened and simply apologizes before asking what exactly he wants from her. Aster ignores her moment of confusion as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and repeats that he came to help with her campaign, proposing that they work together to secure her victory. Still suspicious, Olivia does not accept the offer so easily and asks Aster whether he is really comfortable betraying Schiller. Her mind runs through everything she knows about him. As far as she remembers, Aster is supposed to be the highly competent subordinate, the absolutely trusted right-hand man of the council president. And that is precisely why nothing in that mental profile explains why he would suddenly appear, swearing loyalty to his boss's #1 enemy. With a faint smile on his face, Aster keeps his true intentions hidden and simply replies, "Who knows?" Then he adds that he merely thought it would be more entertaining if he were on her side. The two stand facing each other in the corridor while Olivia processes the statement in silence. Her internal verdict is immediate and cautious. The word suspicious flashes through her mind like a giant red flag. Even so, Olivia thinks back to all the stares and judgment she has received, as well as all the love and attention Lineria has been given by those same people, and she realizes that there is no way she can turn this situation around on her own. Trying to do so would be practically impossible. The realization lands heavily on her shoulders. On the other hand, accepting the vice president's help would dramatically increase her chances. After all, she would be relying on one of the most influential figures in the entire academy. The conclusion comes together quickly in her mind. And even if he eventually reveals himself to be an enemy, she can simply cut ties with him after making use of his assistance. That is a very big if, but I don't think she's exactly in a position to be picky right now. Having made up her mind, Olivia lifts her head and says that extra hands are always welcome and that she is happy to accept his help. Aster smiles at her answer and immediately moves on to what truly matters. He asks what her plan is for the election, with absolutely no answer prepared, because let's be honest, she had not thought of anything. Olivia mumbles that she is still working on it, while trying to look thoughtful. Before Aster can respond, the sound of bells ringing across the courtyard reaches them, signaling that classes are about to begin. Realizing that time has passed much faster than she expected, Olivia comments, somewhat anxiously, that they have failed to come up with absolutely anything. Then she dashes off, leaving Aster behind while shouting that they should schedule a strategy meeting after classes to figure out what to do. Aster watches her run off until she disappears from sight, and lost in thought reaches a conclusion. Alone, he comments on how Olivia has truly changed, leaving him with lingering doubts about his fellow council member. I don't know about you, but to me we've already found our resident heartthrob, and I'm absolutely convinced he's going to turn into a top-tier golden retriever boyfriend for our protagonist. Afternoon falls over the Great Halcyon Academy, and as agreed, Olivia and Aster meet for their first strategy session to prepare for the election. Settled in a more secluded room, Aster apologizes, explaining that it was the only available location. He explains that after the previous day's incident at the council meeting, it was decided that this would be the only room Olivia would be allowed to use. Olivia listens to the explanation without being bothered by it, and simply lets him continue speaking. Aster then asks what her plan is for winning votes. In an almost uncertain tone, Olivia begins by saying that there are many things that need to be done, but in her opinion, the foundation of everything is establishing first contact with the other students, and the first step would be walking around the academy and greeting everyone. Aster furrows his brow, not immediately understanding where she is going with this, and repeats the idea of walking around greeting people, asking whether that is supposed to be some kind of campaign strategy. Now finally confident, Olivia says that it is exactly what she has in mind while searching through her bag. Then she pulls out her greatest weapon for launching her election campaign, a business card she made herself. The card is nothing short of alien to that world, featuring an adorable chibi version of Olivia herself. At the top is an invitation to get in touch if anyone ever needs help. And at the bottom, written in large letters, is the name Olivia Time. Aster stares at the card with the expression of someone who cannot decide whether to laugh or be concerned, and asks what exactly it is. Completely unfazed and puffing out her chest with pride, Olivia explains that it is a business card, that she intends to give this election everything she has, and asks him to help distribute the cards to the other students. Her little card is so cute, and she's even cuter getting all excited while showing it to him. Aster's reaction does not take long. He holds back his laughter for exactly half a second before collapsing into a fit of laughter. Olivia immediately feels her face catch fire and jumps onto the defensive, demanding to know what is so funny. Still laughing, he replies that the idea is actually a very good one, a pretty interesting idea in fact. Olivia immediately lights up at the unexpected praise, but her happiness does not last long. Aster continues with all the delicacy of someone delivering bad news and bluntly states that the drawing is terrible. "Shut up," bursts out loud and clear as Olivia turns red all the way to the roots of her hair. Aster's jab ends up triggering a memory from her previous life. Back at the publishing company, she always struggled whenever she had to create promotional materials or advertisement artwork. She was simply terrible at it. A memory from her old job passes through her mind like a thorn, herself staring at a blank sheet of paper with the expression of someone utterly defeated. In the end, her terrible artistic skills followed her into this new world, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. "Girl, I totally understand. My artistic talents are limited to drawing stick figures, and even that's questionable." Aster watches her despair with a patient smile and comments that this sort of thing is best left to people who actually know what they're doing. For a moment, her editorial brain starts turning. People who know what they're doing. Someone specialized in layout design, illustration, publishing. The connection is almost audible, but before she can finish the thought, Aster turns his head toward a specific corner of the room and calmly addresses what appears to be empty space, saying that he knows someone is there. Aster and Olivia both look toward the indicated spot, and a figure finally emerges into the room. The first thing the newcomer says falls over the room with almost playful calm. "So I was discovered after all?" The appearance of this unexpected person leaves Olivia completely frozen as she tries to understand where exactly the intruder came from. The figure slowly steps out from behind the wall, no longer making any effort to hide. The statement hangs in the room with an almost amused calmness. Olivia stares at the figure with the expression of someone who has just been startled. As she recognizes the face, she stammers, connecting the dots a little too late, wondering if that is not Secretary Orit. Aster immediately takes care of the introductions. Leaning casually against the desk as always, he explains that Orit is the eldest son of their branch family. Then, with a rare hint of affection, he adds that Orit is also his childhood friend. Orit completes his own introduction with the formality of someone reciting a job title, stating that officially his duty is to serve as Lord Aster's personal advisor. Orit then approaches Olivia and studies her with an analytical gaze without saying a single word. Uncomfortable under his scrutiny, Olivia cannot help thinking that he genuinely seems to dislike her. Poor Olivia really cannot catch a break with these council members, can she? Every 5 minutes, one of them comes up with a new way to criticize her. Not wasting any time, Aster takes advantage of Orit's arrival and asks his loyal companion for help. Aster asks his friend whether he is really as good at drawing as people say. Holding Olive's card in his hands, he requests help fixing the disaster she created. Olive feels as though an arrow has pierced her heart at the sheer fatherly confidence with which Aster calls her drawing a disaster in front of someone else. Orit examines the card with an incredulous look while Aster eagerly waits for his evaluation. He turns toward Olive and says that the drawing really is bad, then asks whether she actually made it herself. Completely on the defensive, Olive yells at both of them to shut up and insists that everyone has weaknesses in certain areas. Seeing the way the young woman reacts and the fact that her face has turned completely red from embarrassment, the two young men simply laugh at her excessively defensive reaction. Aster does not let it slide, nudging her with that teasing smile as he says that even weaknesses have their limits. Ordrit, on the other hand, abandons the teasing and focuses on his friend's request, saying that since Aster is asking for his help, he will most certainly help the two of them. Olive becomes incredibly excited by his words and, still unable to believe it, asks whether he would really do that for her. Aster watches the interaction between the two with a displeased expression. Ordrit notices and briefly changes his attitude toward Olive, saying with a sigh that he will help her. I don't know about this. I think Aster has always liked her, and this election assistance is just an excuse to score a few points with his crush. The afternoon passes as the newly formed trio works together to salvage at least Olive's business cards. The table is a complete mess. Freshly cut pieces of paper, crayons, paintbrushes, and scissors are just some of the tools involved in creating a new presentation card that is actually acceptable. After a long period of focused work, Olive stands up and offers everyone a break while she prepares some tea. With a smile on his face, Aster thanks her for the gesture while Ordrit watches him with a suspicious expression. The two are left alone in the room while Olive goes to prepare tea for everyone. Ordrit takes advantage of the opportunity to finally question Aster about his intentions toward Olive. He directly asks why Aster suddenly decided to support her, especially when she is a student with such a terrible reputation throughout the academy that she is practically a walking problem. Aster listens and thinks about it for a moment, then he asks his friend whether the idea that she is such a terrible person might simply be the result of rumors spread by other students. Ordrit replies that for rumors to exist, there must be at least one or two truths hidden among them. Aster agrees while bending down to retrieve something that appears to be underneath the table. Then he pulls out the phone that brought Olive into this world. Okay, now I'm genuinely shocked by this plot twist. How did the phone end up in this world? And even worse, one of her enemies is the one who found it. Ordrit stares at the object in his friend's hand and asks what is wrong with it. With a mischievous smile, Aster says that nothing is wrong. He simply found something very interesting to read. By late afternoon, the center of the academy is as crowded as expected for the time when students are leaving their classes. Olive gathers her courage and dives into the busy courtyard, handing out her materials with the best professional smile she can manage while introducing herself as Olive Time. However, her attempt to win over the other students does not seem particularly effective. Many of them look at her with distrust and fear. She ignores those looks and says that she wants to continue working hard for the Noble Council and asks for their support and votes. The suspicious looks continue. However, a pair of hands finally reaches out and takes one of the cards Olive has been offering to everyone. Thrilled that someone has finally accepted one of her cards, Olive immediately begins thanking the young man. Unfortunately, his expression is anything but supportive. With a mocking tone, he asks what exactly she hoped to gain by going this far. Then he tears the card in half and throws it onto the ground before turning his back on a stunned Olive who has no idea how to react to what just happened. Wow, what a jerk. I absolutely hate that kind of behavior. At that moment, a familiar voice comments that he expected something like that to happen eventually. With her voice trembling slightly, Olive greets Aster with a sad expression. Aster crouches down and picks up the torn card, saying that he cannot understand why people act so aggressively toward her. Olive falls silent for a moment. Then she answers Aster that according to the Academy newspaper, she is a hated person because of the terrible reputation she has among the students. She goes on to talk about her current situation and everything that happened before and during the election. Convincing the council to hold the election was merely a gamble to buy herself more time to search for evidence proving whether she really bullied Lineria. However, so far there is no concrete evidence that any of it actually happened. Therefore, all these opinions about who Olive is are nothing more than speculation. She then explains that everything she did today with the business cards and the campaign effort was simply the best way she could think of to show the Academy community who she truly is. Aster is momentarily stunned by Olive's honesty and finds himself at a loss for words. Haha, who would have thought that sincerity could be so shocking, right, Aster? Olive notices that she has left the young man speechless and asks what is wrong since he was the one who brought up the topic in the first place. Trying to stay optimistic, Aster says that they need to remain positive and not give up despite these setbacks. He then hands Olive a small pouch filled with sweets that he brought so she would not go hungry during her campaign. After that, he says goodbye without adding anything else. Surprised by this development, Olive reflects on how shy she still is for someone her age. She thinks that if she were younger, she might have been more honest about her own feelings. While Olivia is caught off guard by all these twists and turns happening in such a short period of time, someone is watching her through a window. Schiller and Lineria observe Olivia in the courtyard while commenting on how pathetic the whole scene was to watch. Lineria remarks that now all she needs to do is give it her best effort and that there is no way she can afford even the slightest chance of losing to Olivia. Schiller listens to her and can only apologize for allowing the situation to reach this point because of Olivia's audacity. Lineria tells him that everything is fine and that there is no need for him to apologize. Despite the optimism she displays outwardly, Lineria harbors very different thoughts about the situation involving Olivia. All she can think about is how, with every passing moment, this election is becoming more and more of a nightmare for her. Lineria also thinks that none of this would be happening if it were not for Olivia's interference with her plans. Honestly, I hope Lineria gets what she deserves by the end of the story. I absolutely hate how manipulative she is. While Lineria boils with resentment behind her carefully crafted mask, placing the blame for all her nightmares on a single person, Olivia remains completely unaware of the hatred directed at her and continues doing the most political thing possible, trying to connect with people. Olivia takes a deep breath, puts on her best smile, and dives back into the crowded courtyard, greeting people and introducing herself. The problem, however, is that enthusiasm alone does not win votes. She tries her hardest to be as friendly as possible, but that alone is not enough. After having countless smiles met with coldness, or worse, by people who do not even bother looking at her, Olivia is forced to admit that the day's results have been deeply disappointing. She had imagined that handing out cards would at least create opportunities to start conversations, but most people barely even glanced at her. I feel so bad for her. She's trying so hard and getting absolutely nothing in return. There is no way everyone in this academy hates her that much. While Olivia struggles with rejection, her rival experiences the exact opposite. On the other side of the courtyard, Schiller and Lineria walk side by side as though they have been married for years and no longer feel any need to hide their relationship. Their presence sparks countless delighted comments among the students. People remark on how close Lord Schiller and Miss Lineria seem these days. The chorus of admiration continues enthusiastically, repeating exactly what Olivia least wants to hear. Many of the students in the courtyard believe that if the couple led the noble council together, everything would be perfect and that it would simply be the natural outcome. The image of the perfect golden couple, beloved by everyone, stands in comical contrast to the villainess standing alone with a stack of business cards in her hands while receiving suspicious looks. Olivia sighs. She knew this would not be easy, but so far absolutely nothing has gone in her favor. Poor Olivia is moving at the speed of a bicycle while that schemer Lineria is soaring like a rocket. This election is ridiculously unfair. As she feels even more discouraged by the reality unfolding before her eyes, Olivia hears a voice asking whether she should not simply give up already. She is startled by the voice. Aster appears with his arms crossed and his usual smile, tossing out the question as casually as someone poking at a hornet's nest just to see what happens. Give up. That is not an option for Olivia. She explains that doing so would lead directly to her exile. Aster listens and then proposes something that could potentially help her gain the votes she needs to win. He suggests that Olivia use her family's wealth, flaunt her authority, or even intimidate others into supporting her. After all, she is the daughter of a marquis, and obtaining what she needs should be incredibly easy. Olivia listens to every one of those suggestions, but she knows better than anyone that following that path would also lead straight to exile. She shakes her head and says that even if that approach works temporarily, she knows very well that it would come back to haunt her in the future. She adds that it is the same with elections, work, and life in general. Shortcuts bring major consequences. Well said, Olivia. The easy path usually only comes back to make your life harder later on. Aster watches her for a moment, clearly caught off guard and surprised by what she said, and then asks whether that is truly what she believes deep down. Olivia nods in confirmation and says that this election is the kind of thing that requires time and effort with no shortcuts if she wants to avoid problems later. In his usual teasing tone, Aster says that she sounds like a teacher and wonders whether she is really 17 years old. For half a second, Olivia feels the ground disappear beneath her feet. Because of course, she has not been 17 for a very long time. Beneath that high school girl's body is an adult woman with years of experience in the corporate world, and he has just touched on exactly that subject, making her even more anxious that her secret might be discovered. And apparently her Don Juan is not just handsome, he only pretends to be clueless. I can't wait until she finds out that he has her phone. In controlled panic, desperately trying not to show her shock, Olivia replies that yes, she is a genuine 17-year-old maiden. Aster watches her almost robotic response and smiles as though he has finally understood something about Olivia. However, Aster gives no indication that he has discovered the truth about who she really is. Instead, he simply bursts out laughing. Rather than doubting her, he finds the situation amusing, and the laughter catches her completely off guard, leaving her stunned and unsure how to react. Inside, however, alarm bells are ringing. She recognizes how dangerous that moment was. She let her guard down around Aster, and her true self almost slipped out. She watches him from the corner of her eye, wondering about his real intentions. And the same unanswered question returns with force. Is he really on her side? Before she can reach a conclusion, however, Aster suggests that they start thinking about the next step of their plan. Olivia agrees, and before she can even begin formulating a strategy, Aster's attention shifts toward Orit. He calls the secretary over to join them. As punctual as ever, Orit appears from behind a wall and asks whether someone called for him. Olivia jumps slightly. That man has a gift for hiding in plain sight and never being noticed. Watching the two young men talk among themselves, she realizes that she is going to have to get used to the secretary's constant yet discreet presence, since he is always attached to Aster's side. Aster asks Orit whether he has any good ideas for improving Olivia's terrible social standing. Orit thinks for a moment and comes up with a suggestion. The day progresses at the academy, and we see a poster featuring Olivia that declares she is searching for the perfect office worker and that she will do anything necessary to achieve her goal. Then we see Olivia herself holding a broom and sweeping the courtyard with a simple and cheerful expression on her face. Watching from a distance are Aster and Orit. Aster asks his secretary whether it is really appropriate for a marquise's daughter to be doing that kind of work. Orit replies that the position Olivia is competing for on the council is, at its core, that of general affairs scribe, the person who solves problems, organizes things, and handles all the behind-the-scenes work that nobody else wants to do. So instead of trying to appear noble and powerful, why not show exactly that side of herself? Why not prove through her actions that she is willing to do anything? And so the entire academy is treated to an unlikely sight, the daughter of a marquis, wearing an apron over her uniform, sweeping the courtyard with a broom in her hands. Olivia overhears their conversation and says that she actually enjoys sweeping the courtyard and that this is not merely an attempt to improve her public image. Would you look at that? She really threw herself wholeheartedly into the cleaning job. I have to admit that surprised me. With mild concern, she comments that if only someone would ask her to help with a random task, it would be great for improving her image. And for once, the universe decides to be generous to Olivia in a way it has not been lately. A woman approaches Olivia and asks whether she is available to help with anything. Olivia practically jumps to attention and immediately confirms that she is. Relieved, the woman explains her request. She needs help organizing the library, since the person normally responsible for that task is currently on leave. Aster and Orit are both surprised by how quickly things begin unfolding after Olivia's announcement. Meanwhile, Olivia's violet eyes sparkle, standing in stark contrast to the stunned expressions on Aster's and Orit's faces. She happily accepts and says that she will head there immediately. The librarian thanks her, surprised by how quickly Olivia accepted the request. She wasn't given a task, she was given a gift. Sending this woman to organize a library is basically the equivalent of giving her paid vacation. Before Olivia can dash off, Aster asks for her broom so that he can continue the work in her place. Olivia's response comes out loud and almost incredulous as she tells him that he just saved her. With complete confidence and leaving both young men speechless, Olivia bids them farewell and heads off to her first volunteer assignment. Aster watches her silhouette disappear into the distance, the broom resting on her shoulder. Almost unintentionally, he lets out a sincere observation. Somehow, seeing her makes him feel as though everything is going to work out. Standing beside him, Orit is also watching Olivia. With a faint smile, he quietly agrees that he thinks everything will work out as well. If Aster and Orit were left staring at her disappearing silhouette, enchanted by all the surprises she keeps bringing, now it is the library's turn to receive a completely awestruck Olivia. With 2 floors, more shelves than anyone could reasonably count, and enough activity to match its enormous size, the library is a dream come true for any book addict like Olivia. Wearing an apron and a white scarf tied around her head, she lifts her gaze toward the towering bookshelves that stretch all the way to the ceiling, and cannot hide her amazement at the sight of such a magnificent library. For a moment, every version of Olivia disappears. The candidate for scribe, the reincarnated villainess, the corporate executive disguised as a schoolgirl, all of them vanish, leaving behind only the reader, but the enchantment lasts only a moment. She quickly notices that some shelves genuinely require the trained eye of someone accustomed to spotting organizational problems. There is a lot of work to be done. Giving this woman a messy library to organize is basically the perfect gift. She asked for a random task, and the universe handed her the dream job of someone who loves books and loves organizing things. As she begins what feels like the greatest cleanup operation of the century inside the library, Olivia reflects on how often this happens in bookstores and libraries. People simply never return books to the correct shelves. While organizing one particular shelf, she notices a book that clearly does not belong there. As she pulls a volume from an impossibly strange location, the words die in her throat. The question mark practically materializes above her head. What in the world is this? She recognizes the format immediately, even though she can barely believe it. A doujinshi. Finding a doujinshi hidden among the collection of a prestigious noble library only proves to me that people will enjoy these stories no matter the world. Some things truly transcend dimensions. A bead of sweat rolls down her face. Her mouth falls open in a silent scream. She wonders whether that really is a doujinshi. How does something like this even exist in a European medieval fantasy world? She stands frozen, trying to process the absurdity of finding such a thing right there. Curiosity wins. She opens the volume and immediately realizes that it features the same characters from the mystery novel she found in her room a few days earlier. As she flips through the pages, realization slowly dawns on her. It is a doujinshi based on that mystery story, and specifically focused on the very pairing she always thought had incredible chemistry. Looking at the illustrations of the detective and the assistant, she quietly mutters that she always thought the two of them made a perfect match. A smile of pure recognition spreads across her face when she realizes that someone else interpreted the story exactly the same way she did. For a moment, the scribe disappears again. The candidate disappears. The adult who has survived 1,000 meetings disappears. All that remains is a starving fan who has just discovered that someone else in this world ships the exact same couple she does. Completely enchanted, Olivia feels nothing but pure happiness. For a brief moment, she even feels as though she has returned to her original world. Some people get reincarnated and chase power, revenge, or armies. She got reincarnated and became absolutely thrilled because she discovered that someone in this world ships the same couple she does. She's honestly adorable. A polite voice calls her name and brings her back to reality. The librarian who had requested her help is standing there looking for her so she can provide further instructions. Olivia startles like someone caught red-handed. The book nearly slips from her hands and she stammers out a nervous question asking what is wrong. The woman gently guides her back to work, asking her to focus only on that particular shelf for today and to ask if she has any questions. Olivia straightens her posture with the speed of someone returning from a break directly into a meeting, offering the most professional smile she can manage along with an embarrassed laugh. The oh-ho-ho is back, and this time she's not hiding the transmigration. She's hiding the fact that she got caught reading fan fiction during working hours. That's character development at its finest. Alone once more, she stares at the newly discovered book with the serious expression of someone who needs to make an administrative decision. Checking the spine, Olivia examines the volume in her hands and reaches the inevitable conclusion. This clearly is not a library book. There is no registration, no catalog entry. It does not belong to the collection, and because of that, she cannot decide what to do with it. Should she simply leave it behind somewhere, or should she take it with her and protect the secret of the mysterious fan fiction author? At the end of her shift, Olivia says goodbye to the librarian and lets her know that she will return the next day to finish the job. She leaves carrying an armful of books. And naturally, the little book hidden discreetly among them is the main reason she is carrying any of those books at all. She crosses the courtyard with the satisfaction of someone who completed all her tasks while simultaneously feeling like a fugitive for sneaking out with a book nobody in the library even knows exists. That is when she runs into her two new allies, Aster and Orit. In the tone of someone asking for a report without making it sound like a report, Aster asks whether she found anything useful. He comments that he heard about the librarian's requests, but fails to see how any of it connects to the election. Olivia looks at the two young men. Despite the questioning, she remains completely unfazed. With a huge smile and flushed cheeks, she says that she really did find something interesting. And like the devil running from holy water, Olivia suddenly claims that she is running late and promises to tell them everything the next day. The two young men are left bewildered by her sudden shift in mood and try to understand what could possibly explain her rush. Night passes and gives way to another day at the Great Halcyon Academy. Once again, the library is full of students. And of course, Olivia is already there. Olivia hugs the doujinshi the way someone would embrace a long-lost friend, thinking about how amazing the book was and how much she wishes she could thank the author for creating such a masterpiece. But along with the excitement comes the question that any obsessed reader would inevitably ask. Why was it sitting in that location instead of somewhere it properly belonged? The logic does not add up. A work so specific, so clearly created by someone passionate, abandoned in the wrong corner of a bookshelf? Someone must have put it there, and for a curious and methodical mind like hers, that mystery is simply too good to ignore. She doesn't just want to read the fan fiction, she wants to trace its origin. The same mind that refuses shortcuts during her election campaign has now built an entire investigation around a missing doujinshi. Her focus is admirable. Her priorities are highly questionable. Walking through the library toward the shelf where she originally found the doujinshi, it seems that her investigation has finally produced results. A braided-haired student wanders anxiously through the aisle, frantically searching the shelves and muttering that she cannot find it anywhere. Her distress is obvious, and her thoughts race as she fails to locate the book that should have been there. That is when the hero of the day appears. Olivia steps into the aisle and asks whether everything is all right. The girl turns around in surprise and immediately recognizes her. Clutching several books against her chest, she wears the expression of someone who has lost something extremely important. Olivia connects the dots almost instantly and explains that she was the one who organized that shelf. Then she offers to help the girl search for the missing book. The student hesitates and bites her lip, unable to gather the courage to say out loud exactly what she has lost. The tension of two people searching for the same fan fiction without realizing that the other person is searching for it too is pure cinema. One lost it, the other found it, and neither of them wants to say what it is out loud. Then Olivia gets an idea. A light bulb practically appears above her head as she stares at the nervous girl, her eyes widening as a possibility begins to take shape. Carefully, she takes a chance and asks whether the girl happens to know Master and Poppy. The effect is immediate. The girl's eyes widen in shock, and she asks in a voice barely above a panicked whisper how Olivia knows that name, Master and Poppy, a famous doujinshi artist, the very author of the work Olivia has been treating like a treasured relic. The secret is now completely exposed, and the girl has absolutely no idea how a noble woman known throughout the academy as a villainess could possibly know that name. But instead of embarrassment or blackmail, what comes next is the most sincere thing imaginable. Olivia's eyes begin sparkling like stars, literally, and she declares that she has become a huge fan. Without a trace of irony in her voice, she raises the little book as though presenting a trophy. This is not a threat, it is not a political game. It is simply one reader discovering another fan in the library aisle. Elsewhere in the academy, however, someone enters that same library, though not with the same excitement over a fan fiction story. Instead, he is there looking for another kind of development. Aster enters the library to check on how things are progressing. Talking to himself, he comments that he came to see how Miss Olivia's cleanup project is going. He begins walking through the library but does not find Olivia immediately. Nor does he find what he expected to see from someone supposedly cleaning. Aster expected to find her sweeping, organizing, sweating, and doing all the things one would normally expect. Instead, he finds her standing there, chatting animatedly with another student, nowhere near a broom, feather duster, or cleaning cloth. He looks at the scene and wonders whether Olivia is slacking off again. Crossing his arms, he watches from a distance. The villainess who is supposed to be proving her worth to the council is standing there radiant, talking as though she had just reunited with a childhood friend. That was certainly not an image that matched anything he expected from Olivia. And that is when his teasing gives way to something else, something deeper, something more unsettling. He looks at that open smile, those flushed cheeks, the complete sincerity with which she is immersed in the conversation, and something inside him freezes. Any intention he had of walking over and teasing her dies before it can even leave his mouth. I think Aster is genuinely surprised. He has spent all these days keeping an eye on Olivia, and once again he finds himself questioning who she really is. He watches her for another moment, brow furrowed as a thought slowly takes shape in his mind. It is not the cleaning, it is not the campaign, it is not even that smile that appears at the most unexpected times. There is something bigger beneath all of it, a change he can feel but cannot put into words. To Aster, it is as though she has become an entirely different person. He pulls out the flip phone while quietly saying that Olivia has changed a lot since that day. Another beautiful morning arrives at the academy, and there is Olivia again, broom in hand, sweeping the courtyard as though she has been doing it for years. However, despite her positive interaction at the library the previous day, she notices that the reactions around her remain lukewarm. Some students watch, others pretend not to see her at all, but none of it discourages Olivia. She continues her slow and steady efforts, hoping that eventually they will pay off. Watching her casually sweep while everyone still looks down on her is the purest embodiment of "I'm going to build my empire one brick at a time." Slow and steady, girl. Although most people continue ignoring her, Olivia notices the shy gaze of the braided-haired girl she met in the library yesterday. The young woman seems uncertain about whether she should approach. In the end, she never walks over to Olivia, but at least she pays attention to her. Olivia feels that some progress has been made. Even if it is only at a snail's pace, she is no longer 100% invisible. While she is lost in thought, the librarian approaches her once again and greets her. The librarian has come to ask for help at the library again. Stopping her sweeping, Olivia replies that she is available to help once more today. Despite Olivia's positive attitude, the librarian's worried expression is obvious. She comments that they may need more hands and that handling everything alone must be exhausting for Olivia. Not for Olivia. Proudly placing a hand against her chest, she declares that she, Olivia Time, is capable of doing the work of 100 people by herself. What is this girl? The only reason she can say that is because she transmigrated into the body of a teenager. Just imagining it made my back hurt. But before the librarian can respond, the braided-haired student, the same girl from the library, appears somewhat awkwardly and says that if it would not be a bother, she would like to help organize the library as well. She adds that she can bring other book-loving friends to help. In fact, several of them are already standing behind her, volunteering to lend a hand. Olivia's eyes widen when she hears that. She asks whether they are really serious. The girl nods and says yes. After seeing Olivia working alone the previous day, she became curious. She explains that if it would not be a nuisance, she would like to participate, and that she did not want to seem like she was intruding on Olivia's work. I think it's incredibly poetic that Olivia is making her first real friendships with fellow book nerds just like herself. Overwhelmed with emotion, she grabs the girl's hands and declares that it would absolutely not be a bother. In fact, she would love the help. Watching from a distance, the librarian comments with amusement that it seems the jack of all trades has finally found some trustworthy allies. Excited, Olivia thinks to herself that yes, this is definitely a step forward for her social life. And now the library she would have had to face alone suddenly finds itself supported by an entire group of helpful students. Inside the library, people are working everywhere. Some climb ladders, others pass books from hand to hand. Some catalog volumes while others return them to shelves. All of it unfolds in a lighthearted atmosphere that makes everyone's work easier. After all the activity in the library, the braided-haired student is still sharing yet another doujinshi featuring their favorite couple. Olivia practically jumps for joy at the sight of the book and finally feels like she is part of a truly genuine friendship. A friendship born from shipping the same couple is the strongest kind of friendship there is, and nobody will ever convince me otherwise. And it doesn't stop at the library. Over the following days, Olivia's popularity takes a surprising turn and she starts being called upon for every kind of task imaginable. For the first time, people genuinely recognize both her work and her presence within the academy. Olivia teaches tutoring sessions to packed classrooms. She organizes stacks of paperwork alongside Orit and Aster. She helps in the kitchen, she bakes cookies, and she does countless other things. Her attitude and presence become so inspiring that other students start volunteering to help with her tasks as well. Whenever a new request appears, she embraces it with a cheerful, "I'll do everything I can." Determined to expand her connections one person at a time. Her campaign has no podium, no speeches, nothing like that. It has a to-do list. 1 month later, the change is unmistakable. The same Olivia, carrying her familiar broom, crosses the courtyard and is now greeted with genuine smiles. "Good morning, Miss Olivia." The greeting alone shows just how much people have come to like her. Some students run up to ask whether she is ready for today's test. Others thank her for helping them. Some ask for her opinion about the desserts planned for the next festival. She answers everyone, always helpful, promising to bring new recipes for them to try. Looking at the dramatic difference compared to only a month ago, Olivia watches the bustling courtyard and thinks with satisfaction that things are going very well today. The contrast is enormous compared to the beginning, when she was ignored and hated by practically everyone. I'm so proud of her. She really managed to change the opinions of so many people. I'm genuinely emotional watching her progress, and the gossip that once worked entirely against her is now working in her favor. Off to one side, two students whisper among themselves. Was Olivia really such a bad person after all? Lately, all anyone hears about her are good things. The villainess's reputation is being rewritten, vote by vote, smile by smile. But not everyone finds this amusing. Appearing behind the students, Lineria catches them by surprise as she greets them. The girls jump at the sudden appearance and nervously reply, "Gee, good morning, Miss Lineria." The moment they notice Lineria's expression, they seize the first opportunity to leave. From a distance, Lineria watches Olivia happily waving from the center of an ever-growing crowd. And that is when the mask slips. Her expression changes abruptly. Her smile disappears. Her golden eyes narrow. A sharp grinding of teeth escapes her. There she is. The real villain of the story has finally arrived. The sweetness had an expiration date, and it just ran out this past month. Boiling with resentment, she lets her venom spill out as she wonders what exactly is wrong with Olivia, acting so proud of herself just because a bunch of random side characters have suddenly started liking her. To Lineria, Olivia is no longer a defeated extra. She has become a problem, and nothing bothers a heroine like her more than a villainess who refuses to lose. She thinks to herself that she originally believed she would not even need to get involved. But the situation has become far too unfavorable, and she absolutely cannot allow things to continue this way. Now Lineria realizes that she is facing a genuine threat, and she is ready to switch into attack mode to recover what she feels she is losing. Determined, she formulates her strategy. If Olivia is running her campaign through hard work, sincerity, and goodwill, then Lineria will make sure behind the scenes that those votes never reach her rival. Lineria begins thinking about who could help her in this situation, but she seems to have reached a dead end. Schiller is far too concerned with appearances to be useful, while Aster is far too unpredictable for her to trust. With a headache forming, she decides to leave while thinking about how close she had been to obtaining the new life and happy ending she so desperately wanted. Well, darling, happy endings are not handed out on a silver platter, especially when there's a determined transmigrator sitting on the other side of the board. As she walks across the campus grounds, Lineria passes in front of a bulletin board displaying one of Olivia's posters. "I aspire to be the best helper. I'll do anything." But Olivia's newfound success is anything but welcome in Lineria's eyes. Filled with deep resentment, she stares at the poster and decides to tear it into pieces. Throwing the scraps onto the ground, Lineria wears an expression of pure anger that reflects exactly what is going through her mind. She thinks that she has to find someone she can use. Meanwhile, completely unaware of all the hatred directed toward her, Olivia continues planning her campaign. Her schedule for the day is packed. Among her responsibilities are tutoring a baron's daughters and helping organize the historical archives. With only 1 month remaining before the election, her days are completely full. Lately, she has been receiving more and more requests from all kinds of people, and she embraces every task with open arms. The supposed heroine of the story is the one playing dirty, while the girl born to be the villain is the one working tirelessly and winning everyone's hearts. and the audience is rooting for the villain. While eating lunch alone in the garden, Olivia reflects on something that still bothers her. What worries her is Laneria's lack of movement. That suspicious silence from someone who appears to be doing nothing in public. Still, she chooses to see the glass as half full. If Laneria is underestimating her, that works in her favor. After all, people who underestimate you never see you coming until it's too late. And just as Olivia is beginning to feel relieved, her greatest ally so far appears. Aster, the vice president of the council, arrives behind her. Looking every bit the charming leading man with his red eyes and elegant uniform, he leans over the back of her chair and says in his usual teasing tone that her plan of becoming the Academy's go-to helper seems to be working quite well. Olivia greets him and comments that the vice president always sounds so carefree. Then she elegantly turns the question back on him, asking whether the carefree vice president should not at least be performing his own duties on the noble council. Aster answers honestly, saying that he only does the bare minimum required. Olivia finds the answer strange and immediately asks what he means by doing only the bare minimum. He explains that he joined the noble council only because his family ordered him to. His family insisted that he become part of it because he would be useful to Lord Schiller, the eldest son of House Schefflera, the Duckle family. Because of that, Aster has never had any real motivation for council work. He only does the job because he has to, not because he wants to. Aster casually saying, "I have absolutely no motivation," while looking ridiculously handsome is the ultimate mood for anyone who has ever worked a job they didn't choose. "I understand you, my friend." Then he turns the conversation around and asks what truly interests him. Why is Olivia working so hard to win the election? And she answers with complete honesty, because if she does not fight for it, it will be the end of her. There is absolutely no way she wants to die in a place like that. Aster considers her answer and, trying to comfort her, points out that she is still the daughter of a respectable family. Even if she is exiled, no one is going to be trying to kill her. Olivia agrees that he may be right, but in her eyes, exile is the worst possible outcome. She still has her entire life ahead of her. The idea of spending all those years hidden away in obscurity, carrying the burden of a crime she never committed, sounds worse than death itself. The weight of those words feels completely out of place coming from the cheerful jack-of-all-trades everyone sees. Beneath all that enthusiasm is someone who knows with frightening precision exactly how this story can end. Now, taking a more realistic approach, Aster pours cold water over her optimism. If President Schiller truly decides to throw the full weight of his favoritism behind Laneria, then no matter how hard Olivia works, it could all be meaningless. After all, nobody is likely to stand against the influence of one of the most powerful figures in the Academy. The entire system was stacked against her from the very beginning. Olivia listens quietly while holding her fork over her plate. Then she sets it down for a moment and tells Aster that she will never know whether it can work if she never tries. Olivia's sincerity catches Aster completely off guard, leaving him speechless. Olivia, on the other hand, continues speaking and says that even if the outcome ends badly, the fact that she fought for it will never disappear. What she truly does not want is to regret it later. That kind of regret that hurts, where you keep thinking about everything you could have done but didn't. Then she turns the question around and throws it back at Aster. Has he ever regretted anything? And of course, Aster remains completely unable to answer. Olivia just delivered a corporate motivational seminar straight into the heart of a romantic novel villain. A life coach disguised as a villainess. That's what we're witnessing right now. Olivia continues with a kind of wisdom that could only come from someone who spent years surviving the grind of office work. She says that in the end, life only moves forward when you take control of it yourself. Sitting around waiting changes absolutely nothing. Aster is left speechless after the entire monologue. A faint blush appears on his face as he looks away and mutters that she sounds far too full of herself. But it doesn't sound like an insult. It sounds more like someone who was caught completely off guard after hearing exactly what he needed to hear. Olivia asks why he thinks that. The romantic villain blushing because the protagonist hit him with an uncomfortable truth is the classic opening move of every enemies to lovers story. I am officially planting my shipping flag right here. Taking advantage of the moment, Aster jokes that she sounds exactly like that grumpy old man who is always giving advice to students. Olivia is horrified by the comparison and immediately asks what he means by that. Then she firmly declares that there is absolutely no way she is ever going to turn into someone like that grumpy old man. Aster sees that his teasing worked. Smiling, he replies that she had better be careful then. He stands up, and just as he begins to leave, he drops one final bombshell. He tells her that she has far too cute a face to grow into a grumpy old woman. There goes our Don Juan again, never missing a single opportunity to flirt. Olivia freezes at his words. But before she can even process what he just said, Aster reaches out and gently pats her on the head. He tells her that as the Academy's resident jack-of-all-trades, she needs to keep up the good work. Olivia completely locks up. Yet a sincere thought appears in her mind. Internally, she is absolutely losing it. It is the first time in her entire life that someone has genuinely patted her on the head. And then comes the confession that only an otaku like her could possibly make. Who would have thought she would get nervous because of a character from a mobile novel that she wrote herself? She solemnly declares that this is the absolute peak of being an otaku. Having your heart race because of someone who originally existed only inside your own imagination, but who is now standing in front of you in flesh and blood while patting your head. There is simply no higher level on the fanfiction scale than that. But Olivie, always the rational one, tries to calm herself down and reason through it. The cute one here is not her. It's Olivie's face. This is the eternal dilemma of every transmigrator. Was the compliment directed at me or at the body I borrowed? Spoiler alert, darling. He was looking at you. Just when everything seemed to be moving toward a sweet moment between Aster and Olivie, someone watches Aster crossing the garden from a high window. With white hair, golden eyes, and a smile that is anything but innocent, it is Noir Blanca, the treasurer of the Noble Council. Resting his cheek against one hand, he observes the activity below and lets out a thoughtful, loaded with hidden meaning. There it is. Lunaria wanted someone she could use, and the story has just introduced the perfect candidate. A white-haired man with a smile like that did not show up to make friends. Noir continues watching Aster leave his meeting with Olivie. His expression is that of someone who has just uncovered something very valuable. Stepping away from the window, he returns to the council's meeting room, where Schiller is seated at the head of the table. Approaching his fellow council member, Noir casually drops a bombshell as though commenting on the weather. He remarks that the two of them have been awfully close lately. Naturally, he is referring to Aster and Olivie. The statement hangs in the air between them. The president, who had maintained his impeccable composure until now, feels the first crack appear in that calm exterior. Schiller's reaction unfolds in layers, exactly as one would expect from someone trained never to reveal his emotions. Suspiciously, he asks which side Aster is actually on. Noir raises the possibility that Aster may have fallen in love with Olivie. After thinking for a second, Schiller rejects the idea. Firm as a gate slamming shut, he says that it is ridiculous. Aster certainly knows his place. After all, he comes from a family subordinate to House Schefflera, and not even he knows what would happen if Aster betrayed him. Corporate translation: my subordinate would never dare. It's the blind faith of a manager who mistakes hierarchy for loyalty. Noir answers with his usual sharp smile. After all, aristocrats always carry the weight of their families. The word comes wrapped in invisible quotation marks, and beneath the casual tone lies a genuine warning. Then the treasurer tilts his head and goes straight for the heart of the matter, asking whether the situation is not becoming a little dangerous. And then Noir paints a picture the president does not want to see. He warns him that if things continue like this, Olivie is going to swallow him whole. Schiller absorbs the comment and reluctantly admits that Lunaria has also become remarkably stubborn regarding the election campaign. The president continues, and for the first time lets slip what truly bothers him. Olivie's actions are unpredictable, and if they are not careful, Lunaria could genuinely lose. It is the confession of a strategist who has lost control of the variables. Olivie, in the version of events he had written in his own mind, the villainess was supposed to be predictable, defeatable, disposable. However, the new Olivie is dismantling every one of his plans. He thinks that if they do nothing, Lunaria might actually lose, and the weight of that realization visibly changes something in his expression. Then Schiller lowers his guard and shows a moment of weakness. In a quiet confession, he murmurs that he only wanted to stay by Lunaria's side. That was the only thing he ever wanted. The sentence trails off unfinished. For a brief moment, behind the white uniform, there is no president of the council, only a tired young man watching his simple plan twist itself into an impossible knot. Defeated, he wonders how things ended up this way. I can't wait for the moment he discovers that his beloved heroine is actually a manipulator who only wants to use him to secure a comfortable life. Noir listens to the entire confession and studies the young man with a determined expression. While all of this is happening, elsewhere, Olivie is standing in a high-ceilinged corridor, staring at one of the campaign bulletin boards. She notices that her poster has been torn apart. Sighing with the exhaustion of someone who has already lost count, she wonders how much longer people will continue destroying them simply to attack her. She thinks about how lately it has not just been the posters. Olivie mentally reviews the growing collection of small acts of cruelty. Insects placed inside her desk and shoe cabinet, books mysteriously appearing soaked with water where she had stored them. She concludes that these little acts of harassment are still happening. Then she makes the calculation that nobody else in the academy would dare say out loud. At this point, if anyone is being bullied, it is her. Even so, Olivie refuses to become bitter. She reflects that she has finally realized Lunaria has started moving. At last, her rival has abandoned her passive approach. Then, with the good-natured resignation of someone who understands the rules of the game she is playing, she remarks that it cannot be helped. Lunaria is the heroine. Of course, she is going to try to defeat Olivie no matter what. And here lies the tragic comedy of Olivie. She gets beaten up by the plot itself and still gives the villain a discount because in her mind, the villain is technically the heroine. Thinking about her own story leads Olivie into a deeper reflection, the kind that only comes to someone who has already read the ending before living through the beginning. Without sparing her younger self's work, she admits that the original novel did not have much quality. Even so, she was the one who created it. complete with every cliché imaginable. She remembers the central trope, a kind-hearted girl who is the only person capable of getting close to the arrogant president. But that was merely a story written by a teenager. She sighs and acknowledges that the Lunaria from the script still exists. That version is the original one. The problem is that she herself has changed the story through her direct interference in events. And then comes the realization that finally explains everything strange that has been happening. Perhaps because of that interference, some of the characters' fundamental settings have begun to change. The realization settles in slowly. By interfering with the plot, she was not merely saving her own life. She was rewriting the personalities and actions of people who should have been immutable. Because of that, the world itself is beginning to go off the rails. She reflects that, if she thinks about it carefully, one of the biggest turning points in the original story was that Aster was supposed to have fallen in love with Lunaria by this point. However, Olavi was not speaking to herself, and Aster suddenly appears behind her and asks, "What do you mean I was supposed to fall in love with Lunaria?" Aster reacts with a face red from sheer horror, his eyes wide in an expression completely unworthy of a vice president, incredulously repeating whether she just said that he is in love with Lunaria. Olavi freezes, realizing far too late that she had been thinking out loud, and stammers as she asks whether he actually heard that. Wow, what incredible timing from Aster. Then again, he probably should have known already. Recovering from his shock, Aster rubs the back of his neck and tries to explain the inexplicable. He says that he thinks there may have been a time when that was true, but now that he stops to think about it, something feels as though it has unlocked inside his mind. Then he says the sentence that confirms everything Olavi had just theorized. He says that he feels as though he had been brainwashed into having feelings for Lunaria. Surprised, Olavi repeats the word, her jaw dropping. Aster confirms it, now completely serious. He says that somehow it felt as though something was forcing him to like her. No matter what he did, he could never fight against it. Inside, Olavi, as the transmigrated author, connects the dots with a shiver. Perhaps this is happening because of the plot she originally wrote. The force Aster is describing is not a spell at all. It is her script, the invisible hand of the story pushing characters toward their destined romantic pairings, whether they want it or not. Then Olavi asks the question that truly matters to her. She wants to know whether he is finally free from that brainwashing. There is more than curiosity behind the question. There is hope. Perhaps her tragic ending can also be rewritten before this story reaches its conclusion. His answer comes with the same calm, measured tone she has heard from him before. He says that he probably is. And suddenly the atmosphere changes without warning as Olavi waits for his answer. He adds that the brainwashing has stopped affecting him, and instead of moving away from her, he steps closer. The distance between them suddenly shrinks. His face leans down toward hers, wearing a smile that no longer resembles that of a bored subordinate. Olavi manages to think only one word. Wait. Her heart races. Her face becomes as red as an apple. Every rational thought immediately abandons her. Aster smiles, far too close now, and all she can think is a stunned question, unable to understand what any of this means. And finally, Ardan Juan decides to act like the flirt he has always been underneath it all. But the universe, naturally, chooses the absolute worst possible moment to move the next piece on the board. A new voice cuts through the atmosphere like a blade wrapped in sugar, politely wishing Lord Aster good morning. The two of them turn. Standing there is Lunaria. As always, her clothes are immaculate. She greets them with a smile that looks about as genuine as a styrofoam fruit. The heroine herself. Appearing out of nowhere with the suspiciously perfect timing of someone who is definitely watching, Aster steps away from Olavi just enough to face the newcomer, his usual teasing expression already back in place. He comments on who has arrived. Lady Lunaria. The air between the three of them becomes tense instantly. Lunaria asks, her golden eyes fixed firmly on the vice president, what exactly he is doing there with Lady Olavi. The words land on both Aster and Olavi like ice. Lunaria's cold question hangs in the corridor. Now all three of them are frozen in the same scene. The vice president caught in the act, the reformed villainess cornered, and Lunaria standing there with the smile of someone convinced she controls everything happening around her. Aster, however, does not hesitate in front of Lunaria. Before Olavi's nervous stammering can accidentally become a confession, he takes control of the narrative with complete confidence. He says that he is there investigating a report of property damage that was submitted to the council, and that the two of them had only just arrived. I love this. Aster isn't intimidated by Lunaria in the slightest. I'm liking him even more now. Lunaria's expression remains perfectly unreadable in response to Aster's statement, because she knows he is telling the truth. He then begins listing every incident that has been reported. Olavi's poster was torn down, her desk was damaged, and of course, the bookshelf that Olavi helped organize in the library was also vandalized. He continues, leaving the implication hanging in the air, when he says that all of it appears to have been done by someone trying to sabotage Olavi and her election campaign. Lunaria listens to every point Aster raises without losing the pleasant smile she always keeps on display. However, her silence tells a different story. Lunaria seems to feel the walls slowly closing in around her, And more importantly, she seems to realize that Aster now considers her the primary suspect. Aster tightens the noose with exactly the kind of threat wrapped in courtesy that Lunaria had been afraid of. He calmly observes that she could end up becoming a suspect in the case, and that he will make sure to inform Lord Schiller about it later. The mention of the president, the protector, the pillars supporting the heroine's entire strategy hits exactly where it was meant to. Standing nearby, Olivie watches everything unfold with her heart tightening. She cannot decide whether to admire the vice president's audacity or fear the consequences of such a direct threat against Lunaria. Lunaria, of course, refuses to let the threat visibly affect her or give Aster the satisfaction. Her smile returns to her face, carrying poison beneath every polite word. She replies that there will be no need for that. She will personally inform Schiller herself. Then she continues, mentioning that she will also make sure to tell him how close Lord Aster and Lady Olivie seem to have become over the last few days. It's check after check. How can Lunaria be this manipulative? Good grief. Upon hearing that, Olivie visibly shrinks back. The atmosphere suddenly feels much heavier. Aster, however, remains completely unfazed. Then he demonstrates that he still has more cards left to play, and he chooses the cruelest one. Wearing his usual mocking smile, he casually states that he does not care if she tells Schiller. Then he adds that, speaking of closeness, he has noticed that Lunaria herself seems to be spending less and less time with Schiller lately. The observation strikes directly at the heroine's blind spot, because it is true. And because it exposes that the relationship she always displayed so proudly has been quietly rusting away whenever nobody is watching. Once again, the atmosphere somehow becomes even heavier. Then comes Aster's finishing blow. Disguised as friendly advice, he tells her that she should stay on the good side of powerful people. Otherwise, she may encounter problems later. His advice is essentially Lunaria's own philosophy being thrown straight back into her face. Cornered, Lunaria falls back on the one weapon that has always worked, the performance of the saint. She activates her most angelic smile at maximum power and thanks him for his concern. However, she assures him there is no need to worry. After all, she and Schiller are eternally connected heart to heart. When she finishes speaking, Aster looks at her with an obviously fake expression of happiness. Lunaria returns exactly the same expression. Watching the temperature between them rise to dangerous levels, Olivie attempts to extinguish the fire. She awkwardly starts trying to mediate. Unfortunately, it accomplishes absolutely nothing. Lunaria says goodbye as though she has already decided the conversation is over. Then she walks away. A dignified exit that only people who refuse to admit defeat know how to perform. She leaves with her back straight and her fury carefully restrained. Alone with Aster at last, Olivie finally allows her concern to show. Quietly, she asks whether he is really sure that everything will be all right. She cannot help thinking that what just happened practically guarantees that Schiller will now see Aster as a traitor. After all, provoking the council president's favorite person is practically an invitation to ruin. Aster merely lets out a light, carefree laugh. He tells her not to worry. Everything will be fine. Then he reveals the reason for his confidence. Gently placing a hand on top of her head, he says that he has already freed himself from the brainwashing. The statement carries enormous weight. Aster is no longer trapped by the script that forced him to orbit around Lunaria and fear Schiller. Free from the story's influence, he can now choose which side he wants to stand on. And quietly, without making a spectacle of it, he is choosing Olivie's side. These two are ridiculously adorable. I genuinely cannot stop shipping them. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the academy, Lunaria's dignified exit completely falls apart in private. She slams a door shut, and far away from any audience, the saintly facade collapses. Throwing herself onto her bed, she fumes over her encounter with Aster and Olivie. Lying there with her face twisted in pure frustration, she growls and demands to know what the hell is wrong with those two. She's so annoying. Someone please tell her she's annoying. At least in her own mind, her outrage has a reason. She laments the situation, unable to believe how dramatically things have turned around. Lunaria's plan had been simple. Show up, witness her rival's defeat, enjoy her victory, move on with her life. Instead, she found her rival standing side by side with the handsome man who was supposed to be hopelessly devoted to her. She complains that not long ago, Aster was constantly glued to her side, acting completely smitten. The contrast is unbearable. The piece she considered impossible to lose now belongs to the wrong side of the board. I have to admit, watching this bargain bin villain panic because all of her plans are falling apart is incredibly satisfying. I want even more of it. She thinks about how everything had been going perfectly until recently, and her memories drift back to her past, to the time when an orphan like her was adopted by a viscount's family. A lonely little girl who overnight entered the world of nobility. A few years later, she entered the most prestigious academy in the kingdom, believing that her life had finally improved because of that turning point. But the transformation had never been complete. The classmates who had been born into noble families had always been aggressive and condescending toward the newcomer. Most of their attacks centered around her being the daughter of a viscount and doubting whether she even knew the basics of proper etiquette. And Lunaria, an orphan in a place that never truly accepted her, swallowed every humiliation in silence. The smile remained fixed on her face while resentment grew inside her. What hurt the most for Lunaria was watching how easy everything seemed for everyone else. She complains to herself that all those people acted with such arrogance simply because they had been born into nobility. But worse than that was watching those same girls who looked down on her melt with admiration whenever they saw Olivie. And Olivie always looked dazzling. The praise directed toward her was never limited to her beauty or her etiquette. Everyone admired the fact that she was the daughter of a marquis and was always so busy fulfilling her duties on the noble council. She was simply too perfect. It ate away at Lunaria piece by piece. And in her most private thoughts, she always wished that she had at least been born into a noble family like Olivie's. Then she would have had the same opportunities and friendships. What tragic irony. In the past, Lunaria envied the original Olivie, the villainess of the original story, and it is precisely in that state, alone and desperate for a place in the sun, that she encounters the person who would change all her plans. In some random academy garden, she crosses paths with him, a blonde young man in a white cape, just as lonely as she was, standing between the columns as though he belonged nowhere. Lonely as she was, she found Schiller, and he seemed even lonelier. To her, it felt like something straight out of a romance novel. She believed that this was her chance. Beneath that romantic encounter, however, there was no doubt about her true intentions. Winning the favor of the president of the Noble Council would give her everything. Honestly, the idea of having someone like Lunaria in my life is terrifying. How can a person be so cruel and manipulative? As time passed, she embedded herself deeper and deeper into Schiller's life, and she admits that manipulating him was easier than she had expected. Lunaria acknowledges that she only pretended not to care about money or power while taking advantage of his loneliness. If she acted a little spoiled, she could get whatever she wanted. And the final reward might even be a seat on the Noble Council. Everything planned, everything calculated, the happy ending she had always wanted. Returning to the present, she thinks that this is how things were supposed to have gone. The nostalgia turns sour and transforms into hatred. She concludes that she will never forgive Olivie. She convinces herself that everything is Olivie's fault, and that she has to bring her down no matter what. If there is one thing Lunaria has in abundance, it is resentment. And the worst part is that Olivie was never guilty of anything. Consumed by her own fury, Lunaria barely hears the knock at her door when her butler hesitantly announces that she has a visitor. Her response comes sharp and completely stripped of any sweetness. She tells him to be quiet and says that she does not want to see anyone. Outside the room, the butler performs the thankless task of turning the visitor away. Offering his deepest apologies, he informs the gentleman that Lady Lunaria does not wish to receive anyone at the moment. Schiller, dressed in his white cape and golden cords, wears a surprised and wounded expression before the unopened door. The president quietly murmurs, "I understand." And within those two words lies the full weight of the irony. The man whom Lunaria had carefully seduced, the trump card she swore she would never let go of. The person standing at her door with genuine concern, and she sends him away because of the anger she can no longer control. So focused on bringing Olivie down, she never realizes that she has just slammed the door in the face of her own happy ending, without even knowing it was him on the other side. While Lunaria is shutting doors in her own mansion right in Schiller's face, a much more dangerous conversation begins behind closed doors on the other side of the academy. The scene shifts to an isolated room where Aster has called Orit for a revelation that follows absolutely no official protocol. Standing before Orit, Aster holds an object that looks absurdly out of place in this world. An old pink flip phone. Clearly shocked, Orit does not respond immediately and ends up apologizing, asking for a moment to process everything he has just heard. Leaning against the wall, Aster wears a serious expression, but his reply is almost gentle. He says he understands. Hearing something like this out of nowhere must be a lot to take in. But Orit says the problem is not just overwhelming. It is difficult to believe that something like this is even possible. What an absolute bombshell. Aster dropped on Orit. Apparently the story is about to take a completely different direction after this. Orit begins piecing everything together out loud. If what Aster is saying is true, then they are living in a world where Lunaria is the heroine. Aster confirms it without any dramatics. He says that he did not believe it at first either, but the more he examined everything, the more it seemed to be true. And if they truly believe what that strange device says, then their futures have already been decided. Then Aster explains how it all began. One day, while wandering through a crowded marketplace with no particular destination in mind, he was looking through the stalls but found nothing that interested him. Then a merchant caught his attention by remarking that the young man looked bored. In a tone of casual confession, Aster admitted that the merchant was right. Every day felt boring to him. That was when the merchant, smiling like someone trying to sell highly questionable merchandise from a foreign country, made an offer. According to him, the device could show the future. Aster held the object in his hand and questioned whether anything could truly predict the future the way the merchant claimed. Aster bought the prophetic phone purely because he was bored. Honestly, nothing could suit him more perfectly. Returning to the present, he admits to Orit that he bought it without thinking much about it. But once he started figuring out how it worked, he discovered that everything inside it was nothing more than a ridiculous light novel. What he only realized later, however, changed everything. He continues, explaining to Orit that the pages described every member of the Noble Council. He says that within the light novel he discovered that Lunaria was the heroine. And not only that, he, Orit, and the other council members were all characters inside that poorly written story. Orit receives the news as though someone had punched him directly in the chest. In disbelief, he asks whether he really is a character in this story. Apparently, the shock is so intense that even Orit, who always seemed cold and calculating, becomes visibly shaken by the revelation. Aster continues presenting more evidence that the phone truly predicts the future. He says that when he started reading the story more carefully, everything seemed to line up perfectly with past events. Laneria's arrival at the Noble Council was an excellent example. That event is described perfectly within the light novel. The coincidence goes far beyond what coincidence should reasonably allow. He points out that the novel even describes their next chapter, a chapter that has not happened yet. The future was literally written on that little pink screen, and up until now, every single word had come true. Aster's expression darkens when he begins talking about the next chapter. He starts speaking about the chapter that introduced the name responsible for so many dramatic changes in all of their lives. Olivie time. Aster pauses, then reveals that he has been following the phone's prophecies ever since he discovered it. He explains that on the day of Olivie's expulsion, during Schiller's speech, he felt the phone vibrate in his pocket. He stepped away from everyone and opened it to read. However, he received a surprise. There were no new chapters. Instead, there was a message asking him to continue writing. He explains that every page after Olivie's expulsion is completely blank, and that it was at that exact moment that Olivie began to change. After that change, the story continued without the influence of the script. Orit listens to all of this and then asks whether the future is still being written inside that device. Aster replies that it is not. Even now, the screen only displays the words "continue writing." In other words, not even the phone knows what lies ahead anymore. Staring at the phone in disbelief, Aster voices a thought that feels less like a question and more like an observation about their current reality. Their lives were written by someone else. Orit exhales slowly in the face of the absurdity, commenting that it sounds like something straight out of a romance novel. The joke, of course, is that their lives are a romance novel, and realizing that is not liberating at all. For them, for us, it's the best thing ever. Even while struggling to process everything, Aster points out the practical side of the situation. He says that they still do not know the whole truth. But for now, if what is written there is real, then Olivie never bullied Laneria. It was the complete inversion of the Academy's official version of events. The accused villainess was actually the victim, and the beloved saint was the true culprit operating behind the curtains. And Aster goes straight to the root of the problem, explaining that Olivie was not the only victim. Every member of the council, including the president himself, had been pieces in Laneria's manipulation. All of them, the president, the vice president, the secretary, none of them were anything more than supporting pieces arranged to make the heroine shine. The realization genuinely disgusts Aster. He says that the entire thing makes him sick and asks who could possibly have written such garbage and allowed it to affect their lives. And this is where the cruel joke that only we know comes in. The person who wrote that garbage was Olivie, and Aster is completely falling for her. This amount of information is simply too much for either of them to process. Whether it is Orit hearing it all for the first time or Aster speaking about it with another person for the first time. However, their conversation is interrupted by a knock at the door. A servant informs them that President Schiller is requesting their presence. The two of them immediately head to the president's office. Inside, they find Schiller seated at the head of the table, completely expressionless. Aster asks whether he called for them. Schiller watches them silently for a moment. Then, as the atmosphere begins to grow heavy, Schiller gets straight to the point. He remarks that Aster seems to be giving quite a lot of support to that person. There is no way Schiller is this upset just because Laneria slammed the door in his face and is now taking it out on Aster. Aster does not back down. With the calm of someone who no longer feels afraid, he responds by asking whether that is really how it looks to Schiller. Schiller's tone hardens. He says he will let it slide for now, but that it is time for Aster to understand the position he is in. Aster carefully chooses his words. Without looking away, he asks whether Schiller is threatening him. Schiller immediately answers no. He says he is merely offering advice, and the euphemism is colder than any direct threat could ever be. The two young men stare at one another in silence, each measuring the other's reaction. The message has been delivered. Schiller concludes by saying that is all he wished to discuss, and that the two of them may leave. Aster leaves with visible indignation. Turning toward the door, he excuses himself and departs alongside Orit. Behind them remains a room filled with everything that was never spoken aloud. Once they are in the corridor far from Schiller's ears, Orit finally voices the fear weighing on both of them. He says that it would be a serious problem if House Schefflera abandoned them. After all, their houses are merely branch families. This is not cowardice. It is simple survival. The Sanquel and Trenia houses existed under the shadow of the Duckle family. Defying the president could mean the ruin of entire bloodlines. Aster then outlines the exact size of the risk he is taking. He says that if it ever became known that he opposed Schiller of House Schefflera, his father and brother would be killed. Despite the seriousness of his words, he says them with a smile on his face. Still frightened, Orit asks the only question that truly matters when faced with danger of that magnitude. What is Aster going to do? Here, Aster reveals what has truly been binding him all this time. It was not only family pressure, It was the lives of his father and brother being held hostage by his obedience. Suddenly, all of his teasing and sarcasm take on a different meaning. It is the lightheartedness of someone carrying an unbearable burden and choosing to laugh rather than sink beneath it. Then Aster speaks with that same dangerously calm attitude that always seems to surround him. He says that regardless, this entire place is nothing more than a cheap fictional world, and since that is the case, he is going to do things his own way. While Aster decides in the corridor that he will write his own page in this cheap fictional world, on the other side of the academy, Lineria, the heroine of the story, is relaxing, completely unaware that the board has begun turning against her. Sitting alone at a tea table beneath a covered courtyard, Lineria rests her chin on one hand like someone finally allowed to remove a mask. She sighs and comments on how pleasant and quiet it is there. The sweet smile she uses for audiences slips from her face. It's incredible how Lineria, without an audience, seems incapable of feeling joy. It's like her purity factory clocks out and goes home the moment nobody is watching. Of course, the peace and quiet are only serving one purpose: planning. Lineria reviews her most recent actions. She had just sent a letter to Schiller requesting that he keep Aster on a leash, and her mind is already turning toward her next move. With narrowed eyes, she begins thinking through her plan. Aster is not someone she can afford to underestimate. The man has enough courage to openly challenge the authority of House Schefflera. But Lineria's concern goes beyond worrying about Aster's actions. Her concern also extends to Schiller. Annoyed, she remembers that every time the two of them meet, he keeps asking how the election is going, and those questions irritate her immensely. Thinking back on it, Lineria realizes she has absolutely no intention of participating in that pathetic thing. The heroine treats the council election, the driving force behind the entire story, like that tedious meeting nobody wants to attend. She doesn't want the spotlight. She wants control from behind the scenes. Then a polite voice cuts across the courtyard, wishing Lady Lineria a good morning. Noir Blanca, the treasurer of the council, arrives with a smile on his face. Lineria's sweet mask instantly returns. Radiant and effortless, she practically sings as she tells him she has been waiting for him. Completely attentive to the object of his affection, the young man asks what the problem is and why she summoned him. Casually, he remarks that Lord Schiller has been complaining about not seeing her lately. Then, in a carefully loaded tone, he asks whether she is sure she called the right person. Lineria keeps smiling through Noir's question, but that smile signals a shift in her strategy. She says she will get straight to the point. No games, no detours. She knows exactly what he has been up to. And as always, Lineria proves she is not merely fake and charming. She is also a professional blackmailer. Noir tries to hide his surprise, but his words betray the calm he is attempting to project. Lineria gives him no room to breathe. Savoring the moment, she casually mentions that she knows the real reason he joined the Noble Association. With the delicacy of a bomb, she wonders aloud what would happen if Lord Schiller ever found out. The treasurer freezes. His voice comes out harsher than intended as he asks whether she is threatening him. And then comes Lineria's masterpiece of hypocrisy. In a cheerful tone, she says she is not threatening him at all. She claims he is being ridiculous for even thinking such a thing. A threat? Perish the thought. She says this while metaphorically holding a knife against his ribs. The gap between what she says and what she does is the entire performance that defines her character. Then she adds that she only wants a small favor from him. Her smile closes the sentence like a trap. Noir falls silent. His expression is that of a man realizing in an instant that he has just become a piece on someone else's chessboard. Far away from Lineria's schemes, in a sunny courtyard of the Great Halcyon Academy, Olivia Time appears carrying the most dangerous thing this reincarnated villainess has wielded since waking up in this body: a broom. The reincarnated office worker surveys the atmosphere of the academy that morning like someone arriving early at the office just to enjoy having the place to herself. She comments that the weather is lovely and wonders whether she should start the day with a bit of cleaning. The academy's great terror, the fearsome Lady Olivia, standing there planning to sweep the courtyard purely because she enjoys putting things in order. Olivia, my friend, I could use some help around my place too. Her peace does not last long. Further ahead, a group of students has gathered together, whispering about something. Olivia approaches with the automatic politeness of someone who greets everyone in a group upon arriving. She wishes them a good morning. The reaction is immediate and completely unexpected. The students freeze. One of them, holding several newspaper pages, stammers out a "Good morning, Lady Olivia." It sounds less like a greeting and more like a cry for help. They all exchange terrified looks. The papers are clutched tightly against their chests, as though they are hiding the weapon from a crime scene. Olivia merely blinks in confusion and asks whether something is wrong. The students look at one another in silence and collectively make a decision. Almost in unison, they insist that it is nothing. Then they scatter as though fleeing from a fire, leaving the villainess standing there with her broom and a giant question mark floating inside her head. She gives the most harmless greeting imaginable, and the poor students react as though she just announced a public execution. Classic. The topic is you, and as always, you're the last person to find out. In the chaos, one of the newspapers slips from someone's hand and lands on the ground at Olivia's feet. Curious, she bends down to pick it up, wondering what is going on. Her violet eyes race across the lines of text, searching for the cause of all the commotion. However, before she can finish reading, a familiar and teasing voice catches her off guard. Holding the same newspaper in his hand, he asks whether she has already read it too. It's Aster, the man who decided not to accept the fate he discovered and now wants to play by his own rules. Olivia turns toward him and asks if he is talking about the Academy newspaper, admitting that she has not read it yet. Aster extends his copy toward her, warning that there is something very interesting written inside. And there it is, in enormous letters above her photograph, the shocking truth about Lady Olivia exposed. Startled, her eyes widen as she asks what that is supposed to be. The article is a masterpiece of defamation. One line talks about Lady Olivia's evil deeds and her involvement in distributing suspicious books. Another accuses her of drugging people under the guise of offering harmless sweets to various students. Somewhat incredulous, Aster raises an eyebrow and asks whether she actually did any of those things. Olivia stares at the paper, wondering what dark books she was supposedly distributing. Instead of panicking, however, her face turns red in a surprisingly cheerful way. She admits that the books in question certainly are not the sort of thing you can proudly display in public. A suspicious fan-like sparkle appears in her violet eyes as she complains that calling it an evil act is going way too far. And of course, those suspicious books were actually her beloved novels, the kind with two handsome young men on the cover that a devoted light novel fan would never let go of. The forbidden books she supposedly spread to corrupt innocent souls are actually sweet little romances she absolutely adores. She blushes from fangirl embarrassment, not guilt. And the accusations continue. The sweets that supposedly drugged their victims? Chocolate. Olivia explains that she had been enjoying them as snacks for a while. She remembers the boxes she had prepared to serve during tea gatherings, and says that she later discovered that, in this world, they are sometimes considered aphrodisiacs. In other words, she handed out chocolates thinking she was simply being kind. The students of the academy, however, interpreted it as an attack on public decency. Aster takes a moment to process all of that, somewhat confused but amused, especially after noticing her mention another world. Poor Olivia. She served chocolates during tea exactly as she would at any normal gathering, and somehow ended up on trial for it. Culture shock transformed courtesy into scandal. Continuing through the tabloid, more accusations appear. The article claims she has connections to the criminal underworld and is studying a sinister foreign enchantment. Nearly rolling her eyes, Olivia explains that her supposed ties to shady people came from that one time she was guiding visitors around the academy. As for the sinister foreign spell written in a forbidden language, that was nothing more than her terrible handwriting in a notebook. Aster immediately seizes the opportunity to tease her. Apparently, she is not only bad at drawing but also has awful handwriting. Olivia reacts at once, personally offended, insisting that she could write beautifully if she actually put effort into it. She simply does not care enough to bother. His teasing and her indignant defense carry the easy chemistry of two colleagues who have learned how to poke fun at one another without any resentment. Colleagues who, I sincerely hope, eventually become a couple. Joking aside, Aster puts the pieces together and asks whether that means everything written there merely looks suspicious but is not actually true. Olivia nods seriously and confirms that it seems the article was deliberately created to frame her. Every accusation is based on something ordinary that was intentionally twisted until it looked criminal. This is clearly not sloppy journalism. It is a deliberate attempt to destroy her reputation. Aster murmurs that it is strange because the publication club usually writes fair and neutral articles. Olivia agrees. She notes that the photographs and writing quality are impressive, but there is something fundamentally different from the issues she has read before. The book editor inside her awakens and begins analyzing the paper more carefully. This publication simply does not match the standards of the team responsible for it. Her memory pieces together the suspicion. The Academy newspaper, she remembers, always had excellent coverage. It looked like a gossip tabloid on the surface, but its content was serious, thorough, and carefully researched. The newspaper she is holding now does not follow that same standard. She concludes that it may not have actually been produced by the publication club at all. Someone used the club's name as a front to spread poison disguised as an official publication. Aster is still processing the full implications when Olivia lifts her chin. In her violet eyes burns that cold determination of someone who has decided to solve a problem at its source. Holding the tabloid like a piece of evidence, she says that even so, she intends to find out who is behind all of this. She says it with the casualness of someone scheduling the next meeting, proposing that they investigate the publication department. Done and done. Olivia is not the type to leave loose ends for later, so her let's investigate the publication club immediately turns into an adventure involving both her and Aster. Olivia marches through the corridors of the Great Halcyon Academy, with the defamatory tabloid tucked under her arm and Aster at her side. The two of them cross the red-carpeted hallways toward the student press room. She begins by looking for the correct door, wondering where exactly the publication club's room is located. Before she can even knock, however, a shout erupts from inside. Someone orders everyone to collect everything immediately. Right now. From the other side, students answer with panicked affirmations and begin running in every direction. Olivia and Aster stop, their eyebrows rise. Aster notes that the voice came from the publication club room. Peering cautiously through the doorway, Olivia wonders whether they are interrupting something important. She came there ready to accuse the club of publishing the gossip article, and arrived precisely when the club itself was desperately gathering up the copies. Perfect timing. Inside, standing at the center of the storm, is a girl already familiar to the story. Green hair, round glasses, freckles. The observer who is always scribbling notes into a little notebook. Except now she is not writing anything. Instead, she is gripping a crumpled copy of the tabloid with obvious fury. It is Aster who breaks the tension. Polite and direct, he asks whether she has a moment. The girl turns around, annoyed at being interrupted, and asks who they are. Then she notices who is standing in front of her. The moment she recognizes Aster and Olivia inside the room, her tone immediately collapses. Olivia extends the newspaper page and goes straight to the point with her usual courtesy. She asks whether the girl is a member of the publication club and says that she would like to discuss the Academy newspaper. Before she can finish, however, the girl explodes. She declares that they did not make that newspaper. Olivia arrived assuming the club was the villain and immediately received an outraged denial. The "it wasn't us" completely changes the game. The club is not guilty, or is it? The girl reins herself in, embarrassed by her outburst. She apologizes and explains that they themselves only discovered the newspaper a short while ago and that she still has not managed to calm down. Rather than taking offense, Olivia nods and says, "That's what I expected." The response catches the girl completely off guard. Then Olivia raises the pamphlet and asks the question she has already answered in her own mind. She wants confirmation that this is not an official newspaper. The girl blinks, confused. Aster helps explain. He says that after reading the article, Olivia immediately concluded that the publication club could not have produced it. He adds that this is exactly why the two of them came there in the first place. To clear things up, touched, the girl confirms that they are absolutely right. They would never publish an article like that. But it is Olivia's reaction that truly surprises the club leader. Instead of criticizing the club, she begins talking about how every article published by the department is clearly researched thoroughly and written with exceptional quality. Beaming, she says that she loved reading the special election edition. Even though it was released the very next day, the coverage had been impeccable. It maintained the neutrality expected from an Academy newspaper while remaining genuinely enjoyable to read, a balance she considers superb. Her glitter factory simply switched products without ever stopping production. Last chapter it was light novels. Now it is student journalism. Aster, already accustomed to this behavior, apologizes for his companion. He explains that she tends to get overly excited whenever books are involved. Far from being bothered, the green-haired girl looks touched. She says it is completely fine and thanks her. The sincere recognition of their work seems to disarm something inside her. She admits that simply knowing there are people who understand their efforts already makes her feel a little better. The girl was not only angry because of the article's defamation of Olivia, her professional pride as a member of the club had been wounded as well. Goodwill quickly turns into cooperation. The girl explains that she has already ordered the first-year students to collect all of the papers. Holding the pamphlet with visible disgust, she also swears that the writing style is not theirs. Someone is trying to frame Lady Olivia. With his arms crossed and a serious expression, Aster follows the technical trail. He asks whether, as a member of the publication club, she has anyone in mind who might be responsible. The girl thinks for a moment and says that the problem is that nobody comes to mind. If it had been a former member, she would have been able to recognize certain tendencies in the writing style, but the style of that text did not match anyone from within the club. Because of that, she could not build a profile of anyone who might have written it. Taking the opportunity, Aster asks the most uncomfortable question possible. He asks Olivia whether she noticed anyone taking those photographs of her. After all, the tabloid was illustrated with pictures of Olivia herself, captured without her noticing. Olivia frowns, searching her memory, and says she does not remember anything like that at all. Aster narrows his eyes and asks whether she ever gets the feeling that someone is watching her. She shakes her head. She says that ever since the election campaign started, with so many good and bad things happening, she stopped paying attention to that sort of thing because she is constantly the center of attention. Aster can only let out a dry comment. It's hard being popular. The fact that Olivia never noticed someone secretly photographing her is a mixture of innocence and a level of popularity so overwhelming that it is genuinely alarming. But the green-haired girl had saved the most revealing detail for last, and it would help the investigation more than anything else. She says there is one thing worth mentioning. Printing a newspaper requires a specific set of equipment, and as far as she can tell, there is absolutely no indication that the publication club's equipment has been used recently. The defamatory pamphlet did not come from that room. She concludes that because of this, she suspects the culprit possesses equipment similar to theirs, which means there is someone out there capable of operating that machinery. Or at least that is what she believes. Olivia follows her reasoning and says she understands. Aster adds another piece to the puzzle. Besides that, the culprit is someone who wants to bring Olivia down. Taking that into account, narrowing the suspect list becomes much easier. In his mind, a cold and silent conclusion begins taking shape. The culprit could technically be someone else, but there is little doubt that whoever is responsible is connected either to Lunaria or to another member of the Noble Association. Aster is not randomly accusing people, he is building a criminal profile through elimination. Whoever did this needs 3 things: an expensive printing machine, the knowledge to use it, and enough hatred toward Olivie. There are not many people left on that list. The green-haired girl then makes an offer that seals their new alliance. She says that if they are searching for the culprit, they will have all the help the publication club can provide. And she openly admits that she is furious that someone stained the reputation of their respected academy newspaper. Olivie looks at her. Something softens in her gaze. She has just gained an entire department of allies. At that moment, a bell rings somewhere in the distance. Olivie immediately falls from her investigative cloud, straight back into mundane reality. She suddenly remembers something she has to take care of. She tells them she will get in touch if she discovers anything and says her goodbyes. Then, with a hurried wave, she runs off down the corridor, leaving the 2 of them behind. With Olivie already far away, Aster watches her disappear down the hallway with a faint smile. He comments that she is always in a hurry, rushing off to one task or another. Still processing everything that happened, the green-haired girl turns toward Aster with obvious curiosity written across her face. She asks whether he is really on Lady Olivie's side. Aster answers her question with the playful cunning of someone who never gives anything away for free. He asks whether she is interviewing him. The girl immediately stumbles over her words. She says no and explains that she was only curious. Aster shrugs, neither confirming nor denying anything. He says that for now he has no comment on the matter, but more importantly, "Are you interviewing me?" is Aster's entire personality distilled into a single sentence. He discovered that he lives inside a story. He wagered his family's future on a blank page. And even so, he still refuses to give a straight answer to a nervous student. With that same clever smile, Aster turns back toward the leader of the publication club. Closing the distance, he extends his own friendly little trap. Because while Olivie was in a hurry to keep up with her schedule, he had all the time in the world to pull on the next thread of this investigation. His words come out casually, yet every syllable carries intent. He says that he would like to ask the publication club for a favor right away. While Noir and Lunaria's latest move continues to echo throughout the academy, the damage caused by the fake newspaper becomes increasingly clear. Even though the publication club publicly denied responsibility for the tabloid, the seed of doubt had already taken root in the hallways. It does not matter whether something is true. What matters is whether people keep repeating it. Lunaria understood before anyone else that perception is more powerful than truth, and she moves through the spreading rumors like someone strolling through a garden she personally planted. And everything she wanted begins spreading through the hallways. As Lunaria listens to people doubting Olivie's innocence, the satisfied smile on her face becomes the final proof that she was the one behind it all. Gossip is her favorite weapon. And a half-truth repeated 100 times is worth more than a complete lie that gets disproven. Continuing her stroll through the corridors, Lunaria crosses paths with Noir. Her sweet smile immediately finds a specific target, as she wishes him a good morning. The treasurer returns the greeting and comments that she seems to be in an exceptionally good mood today. Her response completely reveals who is behind the tabloid. She says that it is all thanks to him and thanks him for the service he provided. I think everyone already figured out that the favor Lunaria asked of him was the tabloid, right? If there was still any doubt, this is the confirmation. Noir listens to all of Lunaria's praise but still asks whether she is satisfied with only that. Her sweet mask hesitates. He continues. Beneath the polished courtesy, something much colder slips through as he remarks that he did exactly what she asked this time. Then he adds that, knowing Olivie, he is certain Lunaria's rival will come up with some sort of counterattack against their tabloid. Noir then leans closer and whispers his advice. If she truly wants to win, she needs to make sure she gets rid of Olivie completely, properly. Lunaria receives those words and slowly smiles, a dangerous smile, the smile of someone who has just been given permission to go further than before. Until now, the game had been gossip and reputation management, but now Olivie has no idea how large the target on her back has become. Far away from Lunaria and Noir's schemes behind the scenes, in a small town beneath the midday sky, Lady Olivie Time staggers through the marketplace beneath a stack of books that is clearly far heavier than she can comfortably carry. Muttering to herself that the load is far too heavy, she complains that the tasks people keep assigning to her are becoming increasingly merciless. The villainess whom Lunaria considers a threat worthy of elimination is at this exact moment being worked like a luxury office girl, sent alone to a neighboring town to retrieve a towering pile of books. Olivie mentally reviews the situation. It has already been a week since the fake newspaper was published, and thanks to the publication club's relentless insistence that it was forged, it had not had much impact on the election campaign. However, not everything had returned to normal. Some people had distanced themselves from her, but many still relied on her. They sought her out, asked for her help, depended on her. Without even realizing it, she had become someone people genuinely trusted. That still did not make it any less absurd that she had been sent alone to a neighboring town to retrieve that ridiculous pile of books. Poor Olivie. She never imagined that deciding to sweep the courtyard would eventually lead to this. Searching through the marketplace, Olivia looks for the carriage. She thinks it should be somewhere nearby. As she begins finding its absence suspicious, an unfamiliar young man waves to her from a distance, calling out to her. He already has an explanation prepared. Apologizing, he says there was a problem with the carriage. They had to make some adjustments. It is waiting a little farther ahead. He offers to carry her baggage. With her arms aching from the weight, Olivia gratefully accepts and thanks him. Oh no. The moment he appeared, I got a bad feeling in my stomach. This is obviously a trap. And conveniently timed kindness is exactly the bait that works on someone far too exhausted to be suspicious. The man carries the books while Olivia climbs into the carriage, expecting a routine trip back to the academy. The carriage departs and heads deep into the forest. Resting against the small window, Olivia lets her thoughts wander during the journey. She notices how the sun seems to be setting earlier these days. She remembers that it has already been nearly 3 months since she transmigrated, and now there is less than a week remaining before the election. Olivia knows she made it this far largely through momentum and determination, and she finds herself wondering what will happen if she loses. That old fear tightens around her heart once more. She thinks that if exile truly awaits her after the vote, she will be sent to some remote region and die alone in solitude. Yet remaining true to herself, she insists that she will avoid that outcome at all costs. Still, if it really happens, perhaps she would finally have plenty of time to read books or receive visits from friends, like the people she met in the library, or the members of the publication club. For the first time, she has people to think about. And the loneliness of the original storyline is no longer quite so absolute. But there is one more name on that list. She thinks about Aster, concluding that no matter how remote the place might be, he seems like the type of person who would still come to visit her. Her imagination runs wild. She pictures Aster as a considerate man, always nearby. She remembers how he has looked after her since the very beginning of all this. But the practical office worker inside her ruins her own daydream with a dose of cruel realism, reminding herself that it is only because Olivia has a pretty face. If it were the real her, a handsome guy like him would never even glance in her direction. She sighs, wishing she had arrived in this world a little younger. She knows she would have fallen in love with him. She is completely wrong about both things. About Aster caring only about her appearance, and about being unable to fall for him simply because she is no longer young. For a moment, rocked by the carriage, the reincarnated villainess allows herself the luxury of imagining a romance she once thought impossible. And that is exactly the moment reality chooses to drag her out of the dream. The carriage jolts violently. Her rosy fantasies instantly shatter. Olivia straightens up, suddenly alert. Her survival instincts awaken before reason does. She notices that the road looks different from the one she took before. The vehicle gains speed, violently rattling along the dark trail. She clings to whatever she can, unable to understand what is happening. Something had gone very, very wrong. And not by accident. Fighting against the violent shaking, she leans out of the window to see what is happening. Her blood turns to ice. The driver's seat is empty. She realizes the coachman is gone. Wondering whether he fell off or something similar, there is nobody holding the reins. The carriage is racing forward on its own, out of control. It seems Lenaria and Noir's plans have grown far beyond merely ruining Olivia's reputation. Alone inside the runaway carriage, hurtling through the dark forest toward who knows what, Olivia feels terror crawl up her spine. The same terror she has been avoiding ever since her first day in this borrowed body, unable to believe she made it this far in relative peace only for it to end like this. And the question she fears most forms naturally in the darkness while the wheels thunder toward the abyss. Is this where her bad ending finally begins? With the carriage racing uncontrollably down the dark trail and Olivia clinging desperately to the door. No coachman, no reins, no destination. Fear finally presents its bill. Even with her heart lodged in her throat, she understands that if the carriage continues at this speed, it is heading straight for the cliff. And then Olivia's light novel reader brain does what it does best. It considers the most ridiculous possibility first. For a brief moment, in the middle of her panic, she wonders whether dying might send her back to her original world. She reasons that if reaching an ending in this world is what triggered her transmigration, perhaps reaching another ending might reverse it. Her first instinct when facing imminent death is not to pray, it is to theorize about transmigration mechanics. She is far too much of a reader to switch off her fan theory brain, even while hurtling toward a cliff. But there is another possibility, and she immediately points it out to herself. If she simply dies for real, there is absolutely no guarantee that the fall will function like a respawn button. It might just be the end. The final period at the end of the sentence. The violet of her eyes trembles, one hand clutching the ribbon at her chest, and then terror overwhelms theory, escaping all at once as she cries out, demanding to know why this is happening to her. No otaku keeps theorizing when a noose is tightening around their neck, and Olivia is clearly no exception. Just when everything seems hopeless, Olivia hears someone calling her from the darkness. Over the deafening roar of the wheels, a voice cuts through the night. Her heart leaps and twists itself into knots. Recognizing it before her mind even processes the name, Olivia jerks her head upward. And there, outside, mounted on a galloping horse, is Aster, still trying to process everything. Olivia asks why he is there. The wrong question at the worst possible time. Aster does not waste a second answering. He says that can wait. What matters right now is that she needs to hurry fast. the urgency in his voice erasing every trace of their usual formality. Olive's mind immediately gets stuck on the logistics, realizing that he wants her to jump onto the horse, and deciding there is absolutely no way she can do that. The gap between a moving carriage window and a moving saddle looks like an open grave. But Aster is not asking for calculations. He is asking for trust, promising that he will catch her, ordering her to reach out her hand. This is incredibly stressful. What a situation she has gotten herself into. But Aster sounds far too confident. Maybe he took Carriage Rescue 101 last year. There was no time to hesitate. Olive took a deep breath, planted one foot on the edge of the carriage, stretched out her arm and jumped. For a single second, her skirt spun through the air. Then their gloved hands met in the middle of nowhere and locked firmly together. Aster pulled with all his strength, and her body crashed against his chest atop the saddle. It worked. She had jumped, and he had caught her, exactly as he promised. And to think that not long ago she had timidly dreamed about Aster visiting her in some imaginary exile, and now fate had delivered Aster to rescue her for real, holding her hand tightly. The horse galloped away from danger while the empty carriage continued toward its destiny alone, thundering through the forest toward the edge of the cliff. Aster kept Olive secure with one arm, while controlling the horse with the other. Aster spoke with relief, softening the harshness that had filled his voice moments ago, saying that she was safe now. Breathless and still clinging to him, Olive managed only the faintest whisper of thanks. The horse gradually slowed to a stop, but the force of the rescue had been too much. The two of them, still unbalanced atop the saddle, slipped together. That was the only warning they got before falling sideways. The impact echoed through the clearing. Olive let out a muffled cry as she landed on top of Aster on the dirt-covered ground. The story saves the heroine from plunging off a cliff and then, 2 seconds later, throws both of them off the saddle like sacks of potatoes. I almost miss these cliches. When the dust settled, Olive realized how compromising their position was. She was lying on top of Aster. His hands were still firmly around her back. Their faces were only inches apart. His red eyes studied her seriously as he asked whether she was all right. But Olive felt heat rush into her face, stammering out an apology, saying she would get off him immediately, trying to recover what little dignity she still had left, which was absolutely none. But Aster did not let her go. Instead of allowing her to stand, he pulled her back and wrapped her in a tight embrace, his chin resting against her shoulder as though she might disappear at any moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost every trace of formal restraint, admitting that he genuinely thought she was going to die, and Olive's body betrayed her. Her heart hammered violently against Aster's chest, loud enough to be heard. The adult executive side of Olive's mind immediately entered full panic mode in the face of this completely new development, unable to understand what kind of situation this was. This was not the panic of the runaway carriage. It was the panic of being too close to someone who had suddenly become far too important to her. Aster naturally noticed her reaction, and never one to waste an opportunity. He commented that her heart was beating very fast. Olive nearly died again, this time from embarrassment, immediately blurting out that of course it was. She had almost died. She always had an answer for everything, except her own feelings. And she had exposed herself precisely while trying not to. Noticing how overwhelmed she truly was, Aster spared her further embarrassment by admitting that he had intended to handle all of this much more carefully. His guilt was genuine. The plan had almost cost far too much. Leaning closer, he said that he was simply relieved that both of them were still alive. He loosened his hold enough to look directly into her eyes, and for a moment they remained there on the ground in the clearing, simply breathing, simply acknowledging the fact that they had survived together. So Aster knew something was going to happen. He had a plan in motion. The rescue had not been luck. He had deliberately positioned himself for it, and it had nearly spiraled out of control. Then, without any warning at all, he did it. Aster leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss against Olive's cheek. Her brain immediately stopped functioning. She exploded in shock, demanding to know what he thought he was doing while scrambling away from him. Aster merely broke into a broad grin, practically radiating satisfaction, then shrugged shamelessly and said he simply felt like it. Olive knows how to deal with threats, with politics, with sabotage. She has absolutely no idea how to deal with spontaneous affection, and he had found the only gap in her corporate armor: sincerity. Already recovering himself, he teased her, telling her to relax. Clearly enjoying the sight of Olive still completely short-circuiting, she staggered to her feet, one hand pressed against the cheek he had kissed, still unable to form a coherent sentence. Then the mood shifted. Aster stood up, turned toward the darkness of the trail, and noted that the carriage had already gone over the cliff. Watching the empty path where the vehicle had vanished, Aster commented that even while hurtling toward the ravine, the carriage had been moving far too fast. It was obvious that this had been planned. Olive, still trying to piece everything together, raised the only concern her exhausted mind could manage. She said she still did not really understand what was happening. She looked at Aster hesitantly and asked how he knew that all of this was going to happen. He did not avoid the question. With his arms crossed, he admitted that he had known, more or less. Olivia felt indignation rising alongside her relief. She shot back immediately, stepping closer and shouting that if it was more or less, then he could have warned her. Honestly, she had nearly died falling off a cliff, and this man was still being mysterious about everything. My ship just lost a lot of goodwill toward him. Aster refused to reveal the details. Instead, he offered a promise as a bargaining chip. He told her she would understand everything tomorrow. Then, changing the subject, he observed that the two of them looked like a complete mess. So he suggested they simply go home for today and get some rest. Olivia was almost ready to agree. Then logic returned with a rather important problem. Their carriage had just become wreckage at the bottom of a ravine. Aster simply smiled serenely as though he had known the answer all along, reminding her that he had his own horse. Olivia blinked. His solution was literally standing beside them, snorting patiently while waiting for the two of them. With no better option, she accepted the ride. He helped her onto the saddle in front of him, positioning her between his arms so he could still reach the reins. The danger had been life-threatening, yet somehow her heart remained the most difficult problem to solve. Aster announced that they were heading home, calling her my lady. Then the horse started forward at a calm trot along the now silent trail. Olivia sat in front of him, rigid as a board from embarrassment over the situation she currently found herself in. Privately, she admitted to herself that she had absolutely no idea what was happening anymore. She had been attacked, rescued, kissed, and sent home, all in less than an hour, without receiving a single proper explanation for any of it. And yet she glanced sideways at the calm smile on Aster's face behind her, and concluded that his smile was completely unfair. She called it unfair because admitting that she liked it would mean surrendering the last fragment of control she still possessed. Once again, she pressed him for answers, clinging to the only certainty she could demand, that he would explain everything the next day. Aster chuckled softly behind her and confirmed it. The promise came lightly, almost playfully, but firmly enough for her to accept it, for now. And that was when Olivia's treacherous heart once again began speaking louder than reason. For the first time, she allowed herself to entertain a dangerous thought without censoring it. She admitted that when she had been staring death in the face, she truly had not known what to do. But nestled within Aster's arms, alive by the narrowest margin, traveling home beneath the stars, Olivia finished the thought with a small smile. She could not hold back, admitting that if the reward looked like this, then maybe it would not be so bad after all. And that's it for today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I did, because I am completely obsessed with it. But now I need to know, do you think Aster had everything planned from the very beginning, or did he simply panic when he realized she was in danger and rushed to save her? And which moment gave you the biggest awe of the chapter? The horseback rescue, the hug after the fall, or the ride back home with that unfairly charming smile of his? Tell me everything in the comments because I really want to hear your thoughts. Oh, and the title of this series is reincarnated as the villainess in a mobile novel, and we've now recapped up through chapter 17, which is currently the latest available chapter. So as soon as new chapters are released, we'll be back with more. And if you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss any new uploads. Kisses, and see you next time.